from Huddersfield, and that's the view from our helicopter looking down on Westminster, onto the Palace of Westminster and up the road, up Whitehall to Downing Street, where we will see this transition of power from Keir Starmer to Andy Burnham as Prime Minister in the next couple of hours. Thank you for joining us here on BBC Breakfast this morning. It's been a busy, frantic few hours, hasn't it? I'm about to go to the Palace and hand in my resignation, and then Clive Myrie will be invited to form a new control of BBC
One. A new
One.
administration, there's no question about that. You talked about the transfer of power, and that's a really important thing to focus on, I think, in this moment, because I have reported from places where you get a transfer of power. It's not very peaceful. This has happened, 5 times over the last 4 years, 7 times in the last decade, roughly, and every single one has been peaceful, has been legitimate, and has been accepted by the vast majority of the people. Questions today about whether or not Andy Burnham should be getting a mandate, does he need to call an election, and so on and so forth. But we should be proud of that in this country at the moment, particularly given the events going on in so many other parts of the world. And I think that's an important thing to remember.
And a reminder when you see all these cameras and hear all these languages from all over the world of how much global interest there is in the UK in a moment like this.
Absolutely huge. You know, we're going to be talking to Jeremy Bowen, our international editor, about the international ramifications of this change of leadership. What could Andy Burnham be doing in terms of foreign policy, the relationship, of course, with America, and crucially with Europe as well, the continuing situation in Ukraine and so on. We'll be getting into that. But yes, here, surrounded by journalists all the way down to the gates there, hitting the main road. This is a massive story, not just for the people of the United Kingdom, huge story globally as well.
I feel like I've reserved our BBC lounger by the pool, and you now get it.
Get your swimmers on.
Look after the cat, okay? Larry the cat has been here all morning.
I don't want to mess with that cat.
Have a good shift.
Thank you so much. Thank you. John Kay there. Hello to you from Downing Street here on a day that the UK gets its 5th Prime Minister in 4 years. In about 2.5 hours from now, Andy Burnham will arrive at this door behind me to take office, replacing Sir Keir Starmer, who became Prime Minister after the general election just 2 years ago. Seems like a lifetime ago now, but just 2 years ago. And Mr. Burnham, the former Mayor of Greater Manchester, of course, was elected an MP just last month and became leader of the Labour Party just last Friday. Well, we'll bring you all the events this morning live here on BBC One, iPlayer and the News Channel, and we'll be looking at the enormous challenges Mr. Burnham will be facing. So let's take a look at what we can expect over the next few hours or so. Well, the current Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, will make a statement outside number 10. That is around 11:15 today. He'll then travel to Buckingham Palace for his final audience with the King, when he'll formally hand in his resignation. After that, Andy Burnham will travel to the Palace, where the King will invite him to form a new government. And Mr. Burnham will then head to Downing Street, where he'll address the nation at around 12:45. Then, over the next few hours, we can expect to see cabinet appointments. Who will be traversing the tarmac here outside number 10? Who will be in, who will be out? Who will be retained from Sir Keir Starmer's cabinet himself? What Andy Burnham's government will look like could give an indication as to the kind of policies that he will be looking to institute over the next 2 to 3 years over the run of this Parliament. Remember, this is a man who has given few indications, some in the newspapers this morning, about the possibility of taxes going up, for instance, on some sectors. In some sectors, he's talked about the possibility of continuing, certainly, the relationship that the UK has with Ukraine, and talking about the importance of the transatlantic relationship with Donald Trump. Chris Mason, our political editor, is going to be with us throughout the next few hours or so. And Chris is with me now. You've got a couple of books there.
I have. These 2 books, which I think in many senses, Clive, are the challenge, the tightrope down which Andy Burnham will seek to walk between these 2 tomes. So what have we got here? Labour's manifesto from the general election 2 years ago. Effectively, this pamphlet of promises is their legitimacy to govern, their mandate to govern. Now, granted, in a parliamentary democracy, just reflecting on that conversation you were having with John a few minutes ago, it is entirely legitimate for a Prime Minister to arrive between elections if they can command a majority in the House of Commons. That's the question the King will ask of Keir Starmer formally when he heads to the Palace in the next hour or two. Who do you think can command a majority in the House of Commons? To which the answer will be the new leader of the Labour Party, Andy Burnham. Then you can govern and govern legitimately in a constitutional sense. But how do you win the argument with the electorate, given that Andy Burnham wasn't even a candidate for the Labour Party at the last general election, let alone a candidate for Prime Minister? Well, if you're Andy Burnham, you say that this pamphlet of promises, this manifesto, is going to be the bedrock of what you are going to govern by in terms of the ideas and the policies. But then comes the challenge, well, so what difference will there be? How different can this be? And this is where this book that Andy Burnham wrote with Steve Rotherham, who's the Labour Mayor of the Liverpool City region, comes in. He wrote it a couple of years ago. It's kind of half biography, half manifesto. Westminster has been reading this like you wouldn't believe in the last couple of weeks, civil servants and journalists, to get a sense of how he might govern and how he might be distinctly different from Keir Starmer, albeit, as I say, within the tram tracks of that existing manifesto.
But a lot of talk about Manchesterism. We're not 100% certain what that is, but this idea that he's going to be able to transport some of the policies from the Northwest on a national level. The point about the speech, the first speech he's going to give as Prime Minister when he comes here, around about lunchtime, is that he's got to be appealing to the whole nation in order to bring everybody in.
Yes, and so he very pointedly the other day, when he accepted the Labour Party leadership, talking about governing for the North, South, the East and the West, and for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. I mean, you might say, and critics have said, well, of course, because that's what every Prime Minister would seek to do. Pointedly as well, he went to Gravesend in Kent for his first visit as Labour leader to emphasise that communities like that are just as important to him as those in the northwest of England. So how does he, if you like, build up his image, his brand, awareness of him beyond the northwest of England? Because, you know, in the last couple of weeks, we've had the World Cup, we've had heat waves, we've had no general election, no internal contest within the Labour Party. And so actually a big part of what Andy Burnham's got to do, standing here in the street in a couple of hours, by the way, we don't think with a lectern, we think he might dispense with the idea of a lectern. A big part of it is introducing himself to the country and beginning that process of trying to win an argument in the country. That process begins for him in a couple of hours.
Indeed. All right, Chris, much more from you in the next few hours or so. We're going to be talking about policy, of course. We're going to be talking about his ideas for reforming social security and the safety net. We're going to be talking about taxes. We're going to be talking about foreign policy. All that is to come. But of course, he has to be formally invited by the King to become the next Prime Minister and to form a new government. And my colleague Fiona is at Buckingham Palace for us now. Fiona.
Yes, so in the next hour, hour and a half, Keir Starmer will make his way for the last time from Downing Street to come here to offer his formal resignation to the King. This is something he has to do in person. And then very quickly after that, possibly within a minute or so, Andy Burnham will make his way here. He will go in the north gate of Buckingham Palace and meet King Charles, and King Charles will ask him to form a government. It's a constitutional process. This is the way it works in the United Kingdom. Meticulous preparations have been underway here this morning, and of course this is a familiar process for the King. I mean, this is the fourth Prime Minister for him in the 4 years of his reign. And Andy Burnham is also familiar to him. He's met him a number of times before. Well, as I say, meticulous preparations. We've been seeing gardeners making sure all the geraniums are looking perfect. Buckingham Palace gleaming in the sunshine. Daniela Ralph is with me, as you've been here all morning, Daniela. You've seen what's going on, and I say it's a familiar process for Buckingham Palace. Andy Burnham will be the 59th Prime Minister, but nonetheless it has to run like clockwork.
Yes, Rina, this is a show of constitutional monarchy. So there is a little bit of drama in all of this here today in terms of Buckingham Palace. But I suppose we know who all the players are. We know how this is going to end. But it's an important reminder of the UK's constitutional monarchy and the role of the King in it. So we know that the King has spent the weekend at his Highgrove estate in Gloucestershire. He will arrive soon here to Buckingham Palace, ready to welcome an outgoing Prime Minister and a new Prime Minister. It will be a very careful, choreographed, smooth transition of power that we will see here later this morning. As you say, everything is being prepared. There's some of the crowds gathering outside the palace now as well. Many of them perhaps here to see changing of the guard, and things have changed rather in terms of the timing this morning. But yeah, even the gravel inside the quadrangle where the outgoing and incoming Prime Ministers will go has been raked to perfection to make sure everything is incredibly well choreographed and carefully done today.
And so this is not the first time the King has done this, but in order to strike the mood, I mean, you have a Prime Minister coming in, Keir Starmer, clearly a very sombre moment for him, one he could not have thought would be coming, just 2 years after he won that landslide majority. And then Andy Burnham coming in, no doubt with some trepidation, but full of excitement and optimism looking to the future.
Yeah, there are some real contrasts, I think, here today. Firstly, that this transition of power is quiet, it is careful, it's choreographed against the noise and the turbulence of day-to-day politics that we've seen in recent months. And then the contrast in terms of the personal experiences for the two men involved here today. As you say, for Sir Keir Starmer, it must be a day tinged with sadness, with regret, perhaps a little bit of relief as well for his family maybe. And then for Andy Burnham, he will be arriving here full of optimism and hope, and as you say, trepidation, but of very different personal experiences that both men will have here today. And if you read any memoir of any former British Prime Minister, this day here, this moment here at Buckingham Palace is an extremely memorable one for them.
And look, a bit of ceremony happening now here as we see. Now tell us what we're seeing there, Daniela.
Yeah, some of the military movements up and down here, ready for changing of the guard later, that we are seeing here today outside Buckingham Palace. It would be around this moment here that we would normally see changing of the guard, but the timings have all been shifted to accommodate some of the ceremony, I suppose, some of the constitutional moments that are required today.
So what exactly will happen? So Keir Starmer will drive in his car, in a convoy, I assume, into the north gate of the palace, and then what?
Yeah, so we will see the whole journey of Sir Keir Starmer, because we will know that after his speech in Downing Street, we will be able to follow him up the Mall into Buckingham Palace here. A journey of around a mile. It will take just a couple of minutes with a police escort. They will go into the centre gates in a vehicle. They will his vehicle will drive into the quadrangle, into a side entrance of Buckingham Palace. There he will be met by senior members of the royal household. That will be the King's private secretary and his equerry, and taken inside to an ante-room for a couple of moments with his wife, Lady Victoria. And then Sir Keir Starmer will go in to see the King. The equerry will introduce Sir Keir Starmer to the King. Your Majesty, the Prime Minister, perhaps the very last time we hear Sir Keir Starmer referred to as Prime Minister. There will then be, usually around 20 minutes or so, a meeting between the King and Prime Minister, where Sir Keir Starmer will offer his resignation, the King will accept it, and there will then be a conversation between the two of them. You would imagine that would be quite reflective, perhaps, on the shared experiences that they have had with one another. Sir Keir Starmer then leaves, no longer Prime Minister.
And he doesn't come out the front.
No,
He's
he usually goes out
a
a side entrance, so there is no fanfare. He quietly leaves Buckingham Palace.
And at the moment, we've no idea where he's going from.
We don't. No, we don't know where he will go. So, and at that moment, attention immediately switches to the arrival of Andy Burnham. Just a few minutes, we think, between those two moments, Sir Keir leaving, Andy Burnham arriving. And it will be the same process going into the quadrangle, driven in to Buckingham Palace with his family, Andy Burnham. They will then go inside, supported by royal household staff. Andy Burnham then goes in to meet the King. The King will ask him if he can form a government. Andy Burnham will say yes. There will then be some private conversation between the two of them. Again, you would imagine that might be around Andy Burnham's priorities, his intent as Prime Minister, perhaps the formation of his cabinet. And then Andy Burnham leaves here for Downing Street and his first speech there as Prime Minister.
And of course the King and Andy Burnham will then work reasonably closely together in terms of big state occasions, foreign trips, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Our understanding is that they don't particularly know each other very well, although they have met a number of times. The King has made 3 visits to Manchester, official visits, during his time as King, but he would also have met Andy Burnham when he was a Secretary of State in previous government. So there is a familiarity, but they don't particularly know each other very well. They will get to know each other fast. There will be that weekly private audience that the King has with the Prime Minister on a Wednesday. That will start immediately. There is usually a moment later on in the summer. The King will shortly go on holiday up to Scotland, to Balmoral. The Prime Minister and his family are generally invited up to Balmoral towards the end of August, beginning of September, so we can expect Andy Burnham to do that. That will be a very easy, informal moment for him to get to know the King and the royal family perhaps a little better. And then, as you say, there are these state occasions, big official moments, Remembrance Sunday, international travel, incoming state visits, state banquets, where the 2 men will get to know each other better.
And how important is it that they get on? I mean, there have been instances, I mean, famously through history, where prime ministers and monarchs have not got on. How important is that relationship?
As you say, they don't have to get on. It's not a requirement that they like each other or are particularly aligned. I think it is helpful, particularly from the King's perspective and the stability of his reign and how it is viewed in terms of the future, that there is a good, solid, challenging at times relationship between King and Prime Minister. And I think from the King's perspective, he will want to establish that fast with Andy Burnham.
And standing here, you know, seeing the crowds gathering, and there's a real sense of, I mean, there's always lots of tourists, of course, Daniela, but there's a real sense of anticipation. I mean, that building itself forms an important function today, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so. This is the headquarters of monarchy, as it is constantly referred to by staff in the palace. We have to remember as well that we now know that Buckingham Palace is no longer going to be the residence of the King. He has said that he will continue to live at Clarence House, where he currently is. There has been a load of work being done at Buckingham Palace, and there had been a presumption the King would move in once it was finished, but he doesn't want to. This is going to become the official headquarters of Buckingham Palace, perhaps having it open to the public more often as well, because the King and Queen will not be living there. But it is the symbol of this transition today. It is a symbol of constitutional monarchy and a reminder of the importance of that and the King's role in this today.
And rather, as Clive was saying over in Downing Street, I mean, the scene in Downing Street, I've been there many times, the phalanx of journalists, it's noisy, everyone's kind of trying to get their space and broadcast and make sure they're not all talking over each other. But here, it's a little oasis of calm. And actually, on a day where, I mean, I'm sure Keir Starmer, this is not a day he wanted to come, and certainly not this soon. For him to come here for this quiet, orderly transition, and actually, differently perhaps, but for Andy Burnham, this is the quiet before the storm, if you like. This is an important moment.
It is, and we talk a lot about the Constitution and the role of monarchy. For me, I think this is a deeply personal moment. You know, 2 men in very different situations, with the King acting as a reassuring figure in many ways in terms of the conversation he's going to have with them both today. I suspect the King and Keir Starmer have already spoken about this moment and about his departure. There will have been a number of audiences between the King and Prime Minister since Keir Starmer announced that he was leaving office. So that conversation to a degree may have been had already, but this is sort of the pinch point, the big moment, isn't it, when Sir Keir Starmer goes in to formally offer his resignation to the King. And I think the King will view his role in this as quite a personal one as well as a constitutional one, to reassure, to listen and perhaps to guide in terms of next steps for both of them.
Well, we shall see very soon, Daniela. For the moment, thank you. That's it just for now from Buckingham Palace, but as you're hearing, there will be action here shortly. But for now, Clive, back to you in Downing Street.
Fiona and Daniela, thank you for that. Joining us here is Faisal Islam, our economics editor, joining Chris Mason, our political editor. Chris, I was talking about a little bit earlier the importance of today, the choreography, that this is a peaceful transfer of power. But having said that, it's become a little bit more usual that prime ministers are ousted and others replace them. But usually there would be an election, for instance. That would mean that there would be some kind of manifesto where the potential prime minister could lay out his or her stall. There was no leadership contest either that took place for leadership of the Labour Party. Andy Burnham, therefore, didn't have that opportunity to set out his stall in terms of policy priorities and so on. And I've mentioned social care, I've mentioned taxes, the economy, cost of living crisis, foreign policy and so on. Are we any clearer on which direction this new incoming Prime Minister could be heading?
He's painted in pretty broad brushstrokes, to be honest. He's talked about his black box, by the way, as far as this is concerned, both in terms of policy and in particular personnel. It's been a very, very tight group of people in the last couple of weeks who've been in the most intense discussions, both about the personnel around his cabinet table and indeed the conversations they've been having with government departments. They're known as access talks. In conventional times, it's what a opposition party does in the countdown to a general election so that they are sufficiently prepared for government if they are to win. Andy Burnham's been doing it in the last few weeks with just 2 senior aides. So James Purnell, who's going to be his chief of staff, is already his chief of staff, and Louise Haigh, Labour MP, former cabinet minister, who's been central to his campaigning in recent months. So it has been very tight. As you say, the absence of either a general election or indeed an internal contest means there hasn't been that public battle of ideas where candidates, even in an internal contest, are forced to put some ideas out there and see them stress tested by their own side and then have to move a little bit because their rival has moved a little bit, and the usual competitive nature of a race in politics. So it has been pretty broad brush. As you touch on, some of the ideas that he is keen on: social care in England. Talks very movingly, actually, in an interview with Patrick Maguire in The Times this morning about his dad, Roy, a Labour man for his entire life, who's living with Alzheimer's and doesn't know that his son's about to become Prime Minister and is already Labour leader. So he talks very passionately about social care and has done for many years, but what about the specifics? And then one intriguing detail, Clive, which is very much in Faisal's wheelhouse, again in this Times interview this morning, Andy Burnham talking about a recurring theme that came up, he says, on the doorsteps in the Makerfield constituency during the by-election, about the point at which people start paying income tax. It's known as the personal allowance, and that level has been frozen for the last handful of years. And Andy Burnham articulating a sense of frustration that he picked up on the doorsteps around that. And he's talked repeatedly, Clive, Andy Burnham, about the Makerfield test, about the decisions he'll make in there being driven by the people he represents in that corner of the northwest of England. So fascinating that he would float a potential and quite specific tax change the morning that he becomes Prime Minister.
Yeah, let's get on to that, Faisal, because Chris talks about frustration there. Prime Ministers, it seems, often have frustrations with their chancellors, the men or women who hold the purse strings at the Treasury. And there's a suggestion that perhaps there's going to be a little bit more oversight from number 10 over number 11, where the Chancellor resides. And the idea that perhaps whoever comes in as Chancellor, and the suggestion is that it might be the current Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, could be a Chino, a Chancellor in name only. What do you hear?
Yes, I mean, so if it is Shabana Mahmood, and that seems to be the direction that the talk is going, we don't have a sort of large hinterland of speeches to judge her economic views. She was a shadow junior Treasury Minister back in the day, so I'm sure they are well developed if it is her. But, we don't have the sort of run-up of 2 years of speeches that Rachel Reeves gave when she was Shadow Chancellor, if there is to be that change. And so as important, and it's rare to say this, as the appointment to Chancellor will be, I will also be looking for other economic appointments, potentially at number 10. If the sorts of names we've been hearing about, and again, you hear that they're up or they're down, but if it's like a Jim O'Neill, who's a very senior city economist, very well respected, Andy Haldane, a former chief economist at the Bank of England, Richard Hughes, a former chief of the Office of Budget Responsibility. If those guys are anyway around number 10, that is a formidable economic muscle. And I think I'm right, Crystal, on the door, on that golden, it says First Lord of the Treasury.
Yes,
First Lord of the Treasury. Yeah. And so when you look back now to some evidence that we do have of what Andy Burnham as Prime Minister might want to do, it's from his book that he co-wrote with Merseyside Mayor Steve Rotherham. There is quite a detailed set of plans and some scepticism as to the role of the Treasury in holding back investment across the United Kingdom, not just in the north of England. Very specific case when he was Chief Secretary 10 years ago, when he asked about the very successful Elizabeth Line, Crossrail as it was called. He said, well, I want an equivalent project for the north of England. And it didn't pass the Treasury formula. The computer said no, there is no equivalent project. He recounts that story, and that I think is probably one of the foundational stories of his journey here. And so I look at this, yes, I'm looking at who's Chancellor, but I'm also looking at the other economic team, and there is that question. The other thing I would say, just in terms of what Chris said about the lack of a battle on the way here. So what the markets want to see is they want to see, yes, a number 10 and a number 11 that can make the budget sums add up. And there's questions about that. A lot of the policies we've been hearing from Andy Burnham, even in their vague form, have been about spending more money, and how is that going to add up? Even this issue about the taxation and the thresholds.
That'll be billions lost.
That will be 4 billion minimum if you start raising them from 2027, depending on the rate of inflation, 6 or 7 billion. Some of the ideas here, which are circulating actually from the unions, I'm a tiny bit sceptical about how much this came up from the masses. By definition, these are known as stealth taxes. Maybe they are starting to hit home now, and maybe that's what he's noticed. But this is an expensive tax move that affects everybody, and one wonders about that. And I have heard that there are concrete plans emerging from unions about this being their target. And that's such an irony, because this was the same plan that came from the Conservative coalition government to raise thresholds, and then they froze them for ages, because which had a huge effect because of high inflation. So in terms of the markets, they want them to add up. But I think the other thing we've seen in the past few years of instability in this street is they want to know their Chancellor can pass a budget. And so I think what you've seen with this, as you call it, peaceful transition of power, is it seems like, Chris will know more than me, that the loyalties of this Labour majority have just been transferred over to Andy Burnham. So he will be able to potentially make those tough decisions to make those numbers add up, but we haven't heard how yet.
We haven't heard how yet. Okay, Faisal, Chris, more with you a little bit later. Andy Burnham has been talking about trying to create breathing space for ordinary people on the street. And as Chris was indicating there, he was talking about the Makerfield test, this idea that you can't afford an extra pint when you go out in the evening, or a holiday because of the crush on the cost of living. So we're now going to go up to Coletta Smith, who's in Derby with some local people there to get a sense of their hopes and fears for this new administration. Coletta.
Yeah, Clive, I'm spending the day in Derby today, finding out exactly what it is that people are after from this new Prime Minister. Derby is, of course, a relatively red part of the world. There are 3 red MPs, 3 Labour MPs representing Derby, and the council at the moment is Labour as well. But it's a part of the world that doesn't necessarily know very much about Andy Burnham, who, of course, has been centred in the northwest of England for most of his political career. Today, I'm in the beautiful Book Cafe right here in the middle of town. Lisa's in charge. Lisa, is it tough running a business at the moment? What do you want to see from a new Prime Minister?
It is really tough at the moment, especially since April. We've had increased business rates, increased national insurance, cost of living for people who are out enjoying themselves, so maybe not as many people. So some support would be amazing for small businesses.
If we're hearing from the Prime Minister about giving people a bit of breathing space, about helping them financially, do you think that's going to help you financially?
Hopefully, yeah, but we have to wait and see, I suppose.
Well, thanks for letting us be here in this lovely space. We've got lots of guests with us today. Angela has come along with Iona this morning. Angela, first up, one of the big issues right away across the nation is immigration, and that's something that you're concerned about.
It is, but not in the way that you often hear about. I want Andy Burnham to be much more positive about immigration. We're a nation of immigrants, from right back to the Anglo-Saxons, the Romans, the Vikings, the Normans, right through to the...
And are you hopeful that he's going to strike a tone that chimes with you on immigration? Or will he be more appealing to the right wing, do you think?
I really hope he does recognise the contribution that immigrants make to the country, because if you're English, you're from a melting pot. It's part of what being English is.
And of course, Derby, a very mixed area, and one that on average, wages here are slightly above the national average when it comes to wages. People here busy, joining in the cafe, making sure they're getting their cuppa. Shanmuga's been here for a little while. You finished your cup of tea already?
Yes, I did.
And when it comes to the spending that you want to see from the government, you've got particular priorities. You got in touch with us through BBC Your Voice. Shanmuga, what's your big concern?
My concern would be on the rail infrastructure, because I work on the railway. What I would like to see is government working collaboratively with the supply chain and the regional bodies and deliver the rail infrastructure needed in this country efficiently, both in terms of cost and time.
There's been a lot of talk about the railways over the last couple of years, about big changes. Obviously, HS2 has been in the headlines loads. Does it feel like a Burnham government might do things differently for you?
I am optimistic that the government would work with the supply chain and deliver the project what is needed.
So there are lots of things to chat about, lots of priorities, lots of pressures too for an incoming Prime Minister who is trying to appeal to the masses, is certainly trying to become well known right the way across the country, not just in the Northwest. People here in Derby have got a little bit to go in terms of getting to know that new Prime Minister.
The views of some of the people there in Derby. Coletta will be with local people there, getting their ideas and thoughts on the new Burnham administration and what their hopes are for that throughout the next few hours or so. Faisal Islam is still with me, our economics editor. We were together on election night, barely over 2 years ago. Thumping majority. Everything seemed to be going Sir Keir Starmer's way. Low turnouts, it has to be said, but he still had a mandate, a huge mandate. Economically, what went wrong?
Well, I think you can look back to the origin story of that election, the manifesto, and I think at the time people were saying, well, you're really tying your hands behind your back with this manifesto, right? Refusing to use any of the main tax levers, making all sorts of other promises and restrictions. What is your room for manoeuvre? That's the first thing I'd say. And the second thing is, it's a subtle thing, but I think it really did hit home. We were coming off years of political instability in this street, economic instability, just constant crisis. I think the people of the country, despite voting in the way that they did, were kind of ready for just a kind of fresh, just breathing out, a sense of relief.
Yeah.
And I think this is recognised fully in Downing Street. That the extremely pessimistic economic tone that was taken just in the first couple of months, interest rates had just started to be cut, and people were, I think, looking to the future. And then you get told, and I think it was the Prime Minister in the Rose Garden in late August of 2024, there's going to be pain ahead. I forget the precise quote, but that was the message that was heard. You can see it in the consumer confidence charts. You can see them starting to go up. Rishi Sunak points this out. It started to recover after years of crisis, and then bang, you get hit by, somewhat the Prime Minister of the country saying there's going to be pain. I don't think that the whole government thought that was the right message. Right. There's a clear recognition. They were trying
there was a debate around that then at the time, because one would have thought that Keir Starmer might have felt, well, look, we are taking an economic situation in hand that is pretty disastrous, and we need to spell that out.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would have said, well, that's fair, isn't it?
Listen, I've heard from very senior former cabinet ministers in the previous government, in the Conservative government, who were quite shocked that this government, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, didn't, at that first budget, just say, do you know what? We haven't budgeted, or the previous government didn't budget for pay rises for nurses and teachers and all this, and so that is a gap. And the tax cut that you got in March before the election, we just can't go through with it. We're going to have to reverse it, which would have broken the manifesto commitment. And they're quite shocked because they feel that they had the political capital to pass that. So the pain, saying to people, looking them in the eyes, millions of people, there's going to be pain, pain, pain. people look to their leaders, I think, for a sense, even in bad times, for a sense of hope and optimism. So I think they found that quite difficult to recover, and they tried to turn it round within months. From the January, they then started suddenly talking up the economy. They were facing international investors saying, what's this pain about? So I think that's something. Then we had a kind of an unnecessary year of chaos over will there, won't be tax rises. Almost every week there was a bad economic number, and there were some decent economic numbers, but everywhere it's a bad one. It fed through to the markets, which then fed through to whether or not Rachel Reeves had a gap in her numbers that she'd have to fill with tax rises, destabilising. So there were some mistakes along the line. Now, of course, we may get onto this. They will talk about the achievements. But I think I was very struck by something Tony Blair said when they entered Downing Street, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, which is stability is not enough. Right? They said it's been unstable for 10 years. We're just going to be stable, and that's going to be fine. Yeah. And I think that warning, which I think was privately given by the former Prime Minister, well, that has come to pass. Yeah. People want a sense of direction, I think,
and a sense of hope.
Yeah.
And Andy Burnham was keen to use that four-letter word quite a lot in his speech when he became leader of the Labour Party last Friday. Faisal, more from you a little bit later on. Well, Andy Burnham is no stranger to Westminster, of course, having been an MP here for 16 years before taking on the Manchester mayoralty in 2017. Now, during his time as an MP, he held a number of ministerial positions in previous Labour governments and also stood for the Labour leadership twice before succeeding at his third attempt. Well, Joe Pike looks at what a Burnham premiership could look like.
The duly elected leader of the Labour Party is Andy Burnham.
The victory was no surprise, but his premiership could be.
This change today is the most significant change moment in our politics for 40 years. It will take us to a country where life is more affordable and all people and places are lifted from where they are now.
Andy Burnham has kept a low profile in recent weeks, but we're gradually getting a better idea of what he wants to do in office.
We want to give your area more power to build the council and social homes that you desperately need for those families I was talking about a moment ago. More power to improve your high street, backing local businesses such as the pubs and the shops that bring them to life.
He says he wants to transform the economy, our political culture and his party.
Boldly, confidently, authentically us. Labour, that's how we win.
Burnham's allies argue his political philosophy and a focus on inequality can be traced back to his roots, to what he's called a working-class family in the northwest of England.
Andy Burnham said there are three core things in his life. And he said in order, Everton FC, about which he is indeed obsessive, the Labour Party, he's a creature of that sort of working-class northwest England background where the Labour Party was seen as the vehicle of your aspirations, and the Catholic Church. So he might not go to Mass every Sunday, but he has said his Catholicism does matter to him.
His route to number 10 has been tricky, but Andy Burnham is hardly an outsider. He was a junior minister under Tony Blair, a cabinet minister under Gordon Brown and a shadow minister under Jeremy Corbyn, leading some critics to claim he's a chameleon.
The Duke in Westminster is a Blairite, a Brownite, a Corbynite, goes into a bar and orders a pint, and barman says, "What would you like, Andy?"
This was a difficult decision for the Labour Party.
It's third time lucky for Andy Burnham after losing in 2010 to Ed Miliband and 2015 to Jeremy Corbyn. He swapped Westminster for the Greater Manchester mayoralty in 2017, which allowed him to burnish his brand. But difficult decisions now lie ahead.
Greater Manchester Mayor involved giving away lots of nice things to the people of Greater Manchester. Being Prime Minister might mean taking away things from ordinary people, and that's mighty, mighty difficult.
The tone and plan may have changed, but the fundamentals facing Andy Burnham have not. He'll need to try and trim the £58 billion a year sickness and benefits bill for working age people, try and help the 1 million 16 to 24-year-olds not in education, employment or training, find another £9 billion for the defence budget per year, and try and reform England's system of social care.
This is massive when it comes to the things that people care about, and I'm not going to do what Westminster has traditionally done, which is to kick the can down the road on this important issue. I will expend political capital on bringing forward a plan to fix social care.
But how will he pay for everything he wants to achieve? Last week he hinted at tax rises.
We are going to have to work quite hard to make sure we can pay our way, and at some point that might be having to ask for a little more.
And does he know much of foreign policy? The US president doesn't seem to know much about him.
Yeah, know about who?
The new incoming Prime Minister, Andy Burnham.
I don't know anything. I see that he was, I guess, the mayor of a town. I hear he's extremely liberal.
Andy Burnham's return to Westminster and his journey to Downing Street have been remarkably swift.
I believe in all of you, and I am confident we can do it. Thank you very much.
He's got the job he coveted for decades. We'll soon find out if he's any good at it. Joe Pike, BBC News.
Joe Pike there talking about the fact that this is third time lucky for Andy Burnham in running for the leadership of the Labour Party and eventually becoming Prime Minister, and that of course is at the expense this time round of Sir Keir Starmer. We're expecting him to emerge from the very polished gate of door of number 10 there in about, 45, 50 minutes or so. That will be his farewell address before he heads over to Buckingham Palace to formally give his resignation in to the King, and then he'll become just an ordinary MP, or at least we think that's what will happen once he leaves number 10. You can watch the full story on the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, who is the new PM, on iPlayer from 6 p.m, and that is tonight. We're going to get a few more words now with Chris Mason. I had a chat, Chris, with Faisal Islam about what went wrong economically for Sir Keir Starmer. Yeah. Politically, what went wrong, given that thumping majority and pretty decisive win he won just 2 years ago.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, I recall you and I at 1 minute past 10 as the exit poll appeared on election night, predicting accurately that Labour were going to land a colossal majority. They did exactly that. Keir Starmer talked about a decade of national renewal, as he called it. And here we are 2 years and a handful of days on. That lectern will appear shortly, and he will do his best in a couple of minutes before he heads off to the palace to make an argument about how he believes the country's in a better place than he found it. So how has it unravelled? I think the essence of the explanation, Clive, lies in the manifesto I was waving around earlier, and that word, change, yeah, and the perception that there's been nowhere near enough of it. Yeah. I think that's the essence of it. And then what happened over time, over the 2 years, gradually and then very quickly, is that his own MPs concluded that he was a drag on the popularity of the Labour Party. And they'd been thinking that for a while. We'd been reporting that sense building up in private for a while. It was very real and a very real threat to Keir Starmer, and it boiled over after those elections in May, English local elections, devolved elections in Wales and Scotland, simply because Labour MP after Labour MP were out knocking on doors. They asked people, why are you no longer willing to vote Labour if you voted Labour 2 years ago? And all too often, so they tell us, the answer was Keir Starmer. And so, in the end, the most important electorate for any sitting Prime Minister are the MPs who sit behind them. Ask Liz Truss, ask Boris Johnson, ask Keir Starmer. That's in the end what did for it.
But because we don't have too many clear ideas on the policy direction of Andy Burnham at the moment, there's a sense perhaps that, is it all about messaging? Faisal Islam was talking about coming out at the beginning of his premiership, Sir Keir Starmer, and talking about doom and gloom, the fact that, you know, the books don't add up, it's all a mess, we're going to have to dig ourselves out of this hole. Is it about messaging? Is Andy Burnham much more personable on camera? Is he much more able to translate to the public an idea of where he wants to go?
So I was talking to a senior Labour figure about exactly this the other day, and they acknowledged, look, you can't win on vibes alone. It can't just be about communication. Yeah. This person was saying to me, but it is a big element of it. And I think certainly outwardly as he embarked on his time as Prime Minister, the difference between Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer is that you can see that Andy Burnham revels in being on the public stage. He revels in making an argument. So plenty of his supporters will say he's a better communicator. He has a more natural touch in front of the cameras. He's been revelling in a whole slew of social media videos that you may have seen. He was out running with Mo Farah yesterday afternoon through the streets of London. Not the kind of thing you'd expect on social media from Keir Starmer. But also, Clive, his supporters make the argument that Andy Burnham is much more political. And he's been in and around the Labour Party as a senior level for a lot longer. Keir Starmer became an MP in his 50s. He's had a previous high-flying career as a lawyer. Andy Burnham has been in jobs connected to the Labour Party for the best part of 30 years, starting as a MP's assistant, going on to be a special advisor, then becoming a backbench MP, then a cabinet minister in various departments, and then the best part of 10 years as the mayor of Greater Manchester. So the argument his supporters make is that yes, a better communicator, yes, more willing and able and keen to pick political fights and enjoy the political scrap. But, and it's a big but, will that be enough? Politics is intensely fragmented and competitive at the moment. The rule of the last couple of years, Clive, in politics has been this: to be Prime Minister is to be unpopular. That has been the reality for 4 or 5 years at least. Can Andy Burnham shift that? He'll never be more powerful than he is today, but the minute he takes office behind that door, the difficult decisions begin, and that is where the unpopularity, he will hope slowly, starts to creep in.
And briefly, it's not just about trying to communicate your vision to the public, it's about the people in your party as well. And we know that when it comes to Sir Keir Starmer and friends, welfare cuts, for instance, that was very difficult.
Really difficult, and so many of the policy issues that caused Keir Starmer grief with his own side, Andy Burnham's going to inherit. What is he going to do about the welfare bill, which has been climbing significantly? Plenty of Labour MPs quite squeamish as we see the lectern arriving
so he's not
us.
Going to be doing it with us.
Okay, so this is Sir Keir Starmer. Lectern.
Right, okay.
We think it will only have one outing today, this lectern. This is the hardest working lectern in the Western world. Actually, it's not, because there's been different lecterns. Liz Truss had a kind of swirly-based lectern when she was in the job. This is a straight-based lectern. Has a very precise spot to be put on.
I was going to say, and we're also not going to be hearing Ode to Joy or the possibility of any other extraneous noises, perhaps the police helicopters above, but no music. That's been banned by the authorities.
It has. So on the last couple of occasions here, not least the day that Keir Starmer announced that he would be leaving, he was, to a greater or lesser extent, drowned out by noises off from the bottom of Whitehall. That has been banned this time, so we will hear both the outgoing Prime Minister and the incoming Prime Minister without a musical fanfare or otherwise.
All right, Chris, more from you in a few minutes. So the lectern is here. We're expecting the Prime Minister to come out possibly in about half an hour or so to give his farewell address before heading over to Buckingham Palace to formally resign as Prime Minister. We're going to see now how other parts of the country are reacting to another new Prime Minister. In a moment, we'll be in Cardiff and Belfast, but first we're going to go to Edinburgh and Katie Hunter, who's there for us now. What's the view from there, Katie?
Morning from Holyrood, Clive. Well, Scotland's First Minister John Swinney has said that he wishes Andy Burnham well. He said that the two men will work together to improve the lives of the people of Scotland. And he said that if Andy Burnham is serious about strengthening the powers of the Scottish Parliament to grow the economy, then Mr Burnham will find a willing partner with John Swinney. But the First Minister has also made the point that it isn't for the, as he puts it, latest incumbent of number 10 to decide the future of Scotland. It is for the people of Scotland to decide that. In other words, I think there will be calls for Andy Burnham to transfer powers from Westminster to Holyrood so that Holyrood can have the power to hold a second referendum. Don't forget, a majority of MSPs here support independence. In the recent Scottish election, Scottish Labour suffered their worst result in the history of devolution. So there's a lot of talk here among Scottish Labour figures of energy, of optimism. They hope Andy Burnham's appointment will be a turning point, but of course his opponents are saying that he will be judged on his actions, not on his words.
Katie, has there been much of a relationship between Andy Burnham and the Scottish Labour Party?
Well, John Swinney will be hoping to meet Andy Burnham in the coming days. Of course, Andy Burnham knows some figures from Scottish Labour from his time back in the Blair and Brown government in that era. And it will be interesting to see later this afternoon who he appoints as the new Scottish Secretary. Douglas Alexander in that role at the moment. Andy Burnham and Douglas Alexander do go back to the Brown and Blair days, or could there be a newer face for that position, perhaps Blair McDougall or Michael Shanks? But as yet, Andy Burnham, Team Burnham, have been keeping their cards pretty close to their chest, so we should get more answers on that front later this afternoon.
All right, Katie, thank you. Katie Hunter there at Holyrood. We're going to go to Howell Griffiths, who's at the Senedd in Cardiff. Howell, I was with you on that night that Labour was obliterated in the regional elections. That was possibly the moment many people would point to as the final nail in the coffin for Sir Keir Starmer that's led to events today.
Absolutely, it's hard to understate the impact of that Senedd election after Labour ruled Wales for 27 years. To lose that power and to lose it in an incredible shift towards Plaid Cymru as the government, Reform as the second place party, Labour way behind. Many people here, in fact, I think I've stood right here interviewing a former Labour Senedd member, putting the blame squarely on Sir Keir Starmer, as Chris reflected there. People on the doorstep, according to Labour MSs at least, blaming Sir Keir, saying they didn't want to vote for Labour in Wales because of the UK party. Now, how does Andy Burnham rebuild bridges with Labour supporters here? It will be a long process, and he has to do, well, arguably two things. Talk to Labour in Wales, but also speak to the party of government, now Plaid Cymru. In theory, both camps support greater devolution. We've heard that message a lot from Andy Burnham. In practice, it might be a difficult relationship because they want different things. Andy Burnham talking about giving regions in Wales more power. The Welsh Government pointing out actually local government is under their control, as is housing, as is social care. So many of the subjects we've heard so far from Andy Burnham. So how power and money flows in that new relationship between Wales and Westminster will be interesting to track.
Yeah, that will be fascinating, Howell. But is there a sense from the local Labour Party that perhaps this change of leadership might see their fortunes turn in a better direction?
Well, arguably, the only way is up for Welsh Labour now, having lost so many of their members. The previous First Minister, Eluned Morgan, losing her seat. So a new leader coming into place, Ken Skates, leading only a small group within the Senedd. We know that he is a supporter of Andy Burnham. We believe that he was out there actually campaigning in Makerfield for Andy Burnham. So there's a relationship there. And Ken Skates, who leads leads Labour in Wales now, is from North Wales and would maybe have more in common with a Prime Minister who's from the northwest of England. So there's a relationship there that may help Labour in future Senedd elections and arguably maybe even more in future general elections. It depends on the kind of Welsh Labour we're talking about. Is it one that wants to appeal to Plaid Cymru voters here, talking about greater devolution, things like justice, like rail, the things that Plaid Cymru wants? Or is it maybe more of a centralist one that, while it talks about devolution, wants to keep a grip of those core issues for the UK government? That's maybe where the tension is within Labour. That's something that Andy Burnham will need to consider when he speaks to Ken Skates in the future.
All right, Howell Griffith at the Senedd there in Cardiff. We're going to cross over to Sarah Gervin, who's at Stormont, I see, for us today. Sarah, just give us a sense of how this new leadership might go down where you are.
Yeah, well, I think the issue is, and we've been hearing this from Scotland and Wales as well, is that Andy Burnham is a bit of an unknown quantity. We don't really know about his policies. We don't really know how he feels about Northern Ireland. But we do know that there is a bit of a backlog here in Northern Ireland for him to deal with when he becomes Prime Minister. Now, first of all, and probably most pressing, the devolved government, the Northern Ireland Executive here at Stormont, is yet to set a budget, despite the fact that we're nearly 3 months into the financial year. Northern Ireland politicians have said, look, we need more money, but the message from the UK government so far has been, this is your responsibility and you need to sort it out. There's also the issue of legacy. How to deal with Northern Ireland's violent and troubled past has been a real thorn in the side for previous Prime Ministers. And Sir Keir Starmer's Labour government introduced a bill through Parliament to try to deal with some of those issues. It will be expected that Andy Burnham will continue with that legislation, so that'll be watched on really carefully. And then, as we've also been hearing from Scotland and Wales, those issues around devolution, his comments about taking power deeper down, we just don't know what that means at the moment. So when we do hear more detail, for sure politicians here at Stormont will be listening very, very carefully indeed.
Sarah, thank you for that. Sarah Govan there at Stormont, and also to Howell Griffith in Cardiff and Katie Hunter live in Edinburgh at Holyrood. Many thanks. You join us here at Downing Street, where we're expecting in a little bit over 20 minutes now Sir Keir Starmer to leave this famous building and go to Buckingham Palace to tender his resignation. We've got a few people coming in now. Chris Mason is with me. Chris?
Yeah, this is the arrival of the departure party, if you like, for Keir Starmer. So what we're going to see in the next couple of hours is an element of choreography around supporters. I'm told there will be some overlap between the supporters of Keir Starmer and the supporters of Andy Burnham. There will be some who will only be at one of the two occasions. So what we see here gathering behind us, a collection of supporters of Keir Starmer. They'll be here as the backdrop, if you like, to his moment at the podium, which we expect in the next 20 minutes, half an hour or so. And I guess one or two people for him to greet, to say hello to as he walks down the street to get into his car to head to the palace shortly after that.
Potentially some of these people would have been here just over 2 years ago.
Indeed so.
When he took office.
Indeed so, and I think there's a pointed attempt from Keir Starmer's team to acknowledge that this is a different occasion from arriving. Let's be frank. There's far fewer people here than were here 2 years ago, and there was a very jubilant spirit then. They were all waving Union flags and obviously smiles of pride and achievement, and this time clearly for Keir Starmer it's a moment of sadness and rejection.
Sure. I want to bring in Annabelle Tiffin, the BBC's Northwest political editor. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Obviously, you know Andy Burnham pretty well from your work up in the Northwest, and he's talking about transferring a certain amount of power from here up there. How is that going to work?
Well, this is at Number 10 North, which he announced when he did his big speech at the People's History Museum. There is a slight joke up there that this is because Marie France, his wife, didn't particularly want to have to come down here, so he's had to set up a base up there. But this is what he wants, as he calls it, he wants it to be the nerve centre of Britain. So he wants a lot of his transformations, as he sees it, to go through there. So it's things like his massive programme on council house building. He wants to be centred from there. And obviously his big thing is devolution. So for him to be serious about devolution, he has to show that it's not always going to be here. It's not going to be London-centric. How it works, I don't know. You know, he says he's going to spend at least one day a week up there.
At least one day a week up there.
At least one day a week up there. Right. But I mean, we know how great the trains are, don't we, between Manchester and London?
I'm from Bolton. So I know exactly what the trains are like up to the northwest.
First, hasn't he? And we don't have an HS2, so that could be an issue. How much of this he's going to take up there. It's certainly not going to be like this. It's going to be, we believe, in Ancoats, which is a very up-and-coming part of Manchester city centre, in a big new fancy glass building. So, you know, the sort of mouse-infested number 10, it'll be quite different, I think, up there.
Yeah, no Larry the Cat up there, one suspects. I mean, just how successful has he been in Manchester in rejuvenating that city?
Well, he has been successful, and a lot of people would say that the train was already running into the success, and he's now taken over the driving of it. So Sir Howard Bernstein, who was the chief executive of Manchester City Council for years, Sir Richard Leese, who was leader of the council for years, really started that rejuvenation of Manchester, and the growth has really grown, literally. You can see it when you go into the city centre, the huge tower blocks. But he has built upon that with a lot of foreign investment. He's very good at bringing in that kind of thing. So he has been enormously successful. Manchester City region is the fastest growing economy in the UK at the moment. But even he will admit that is not 100% down to Andy Burnham. Success in his popularity, yes, he is a very, very popular mayor, and he has been throughout his tenure, really, for the last 9 years. At the last mayoral election, he won. I looked it up because I've been saying he won every single ward in Greater Manchester. He actually didn't win one in Oldham. That was won by an independent. But yes, he is enormously popular. His success, it depends. If you don't like the clean air zone, he wasn't successful. Right. He wasn't wholly successful with the police. They went into greater measures, but he'll say he sorted that out. But he did integrate the transport system, which is his ultimate legacy.
All right. Chris, very briefly.
So we see the kind of horseshoe of supporters of Keir Starmer assembling behind us, including prominent members of the cabinet.
Yeah.
So we can see David Lammy there, the Deputy Prime Minister, just being shown to his position, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves. These titles that these people will perhaps only hold for a matter of hours now. We can see Sir Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, Lord Khan, as he will soon be, having been offered a seat in the House of Lords, and some of the key cabinet ministers and those most loyal to Keir Starmer in his last weeks in power. Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister there, Nick Thomas-Symonds, Steve Reed, a really doughty defender of Keir Starmer in some really difficult times for him, assembling here, many of them with their sunglasses on, awaiting the Prime Minister, for he is still that for an hour or so yet, Keir Starmer, who will be heading out to address us shortly.
Indeed, in about 15 minutes' time. Annabelle, many thanks for that. Chris, more from you a little bit later. It's just hit 11 o'clock. You're watching a BBC News special of the UK's new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham. And welcome to viewers joining us from around the world. And as I say, we will be expecting the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, to give his final address here in Downing Street. He announced his resignation here a few weeks back, and now he will be leaving for good. And as Chris was mentioning there, behind us gathered now many members of his administration, David Lammy, saying hello to us there, and next to him, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves. A poignant moment, given that it's little over 2 years since Sir Keir Starmer won that thumping majority and pledged 10 years of activity from number 10, but all that obviously has been cut short. When he comes here and he makes that speech, he will then depart to Buckingham Palace, where he will formally hand in his resignation to King Charles. And my colleague Fiona is there for us now. Fiona.
Yes, well, we and a gathering crowd are here at Buckingham Palace. The Union Jack has been taken down. The royal standard has been raised over the palace to mark the arrival of King Charles just a few moments ago. And then after him, as you've been hearing, Keir Starmer will arrive, he will resign, and then Andy Burnham will follow, and the King will ask him to form a government. Now, Daniela, just fill us in exactly what will happen when Keir Starmer, let's take him first, gets inside the palace.
Yes, what we will see today is a very smooth transition of power overseen by King Charles. First in will be Sir Keir Starmer with his family. He will go in for a private audience with the King. He will offer his resignation. That will be accepted. There will then be some private moments between the King and Prime Minister, you would think, to reflect perhaps on the past couple of years and their own experiences and time together. Sir Keir Starmer will then leave. Minutes later, the arrival of Andy Burnham and his family. The same process, Andy Burnham will go in to see the King for a private audience. He will be asked by the King if he can form a government. Andy Burnham will say yes, and then again there will be some private time for them both to discuss priorities and intent and perhaps the formation of a cabinet.
Daniela, for now, thank you very much. There's a growing sense of anticipation here at Buckingham Palace, as there is at Downing Street. Clive, back to you.
Right, Fiona, thank you for that. We're just waiting for the current Prime Minister to come out and address the nation. Probably 2-3 minute speech, obviously say his thank yous and farewell, but also talk up, one suspects, the successes that he believes he's had in his time in power. Chris, I was talking to Annabelle Tiffin there about Andy Burnham and the success he believes he's had in Manchester. Sir Keir Starmer will be talking about his own successes despite his curtailed tenure in office.
Yeah, he will attempt, I think, in this speech that we'll hear. Short speech, as you say. I think it'll just be a couple of minutes. He's well aware that it is Andy Burnham's day today, but he wants to share some valedictory words at the Downing Street lectern for the final time. His argument has been in the last few weeks that the test of any Prime Minister is whether you leave the country in a better state than you found it. It is his argument. I mean, he would say this, wouldn't he? But it is his argument that he can point to evidence that that is true. Certainly his team emphasise that he thinks he has a record he can be proud of in domestic politics as well as the international stage, where quite often, frankly, he felt more comfortable than he did on the domestic stage. He's proud, for instance, of the social media ban for teenage children. Talks about lifting people out of child poverty. So it wouldn't surprise me if those two, for instance, get a mention. Perhaps indeed that moment in the House of Commons last week that he managed to pull off just before he leaves the job, which is the so-called Hillsborough law, demanding a duty of candour in public officials after disasters like what we saw at Hillsborough. So I think it'll be that kind of reflection from Keir Starmer. He has attempted publicly to be as dignified as a difficult moment like this that he can manage, because look, the bottom line is that he's annoyed at having to leave office as soon as
he didn't want to leave after 2 years.
He didn't want to leave. He did everything he possibly could to make the barrier to entry, if you like, for Andy Burnham or indeed anyone else as high as possible, talking about how he would contest any challenge to his leadership. Now, it didn't come to that in the end, as can happen to a Prime Minister in office if it becomes overwhelmingly obvious that you cannot carry on because your party won't wear it, then you have no option but to go. But he did as much as he could to hold back the tide. Of course, remember, it's only a matter of months ago that he refused Andy Burnham a passage to stand as a Labour candidate in a by-election. And here we are, just an hour or so away from Andy Burnham becoming Prime Minister. And quite the sight, I think, Clive, that we have behind us here. It's often talked about in the House of Commons as donutting, the people that a Prime Minister will choose to sit in the immediate ring around them so that they are visible on the television when the Prime Minister is talking. Well, here we have the Downing Street's equivalent of a rather elongated donut. In fact, it's not a donut at all, is it? It's a sort of horseshoe of his closest staff and supporters and cabinet ministers. Interesting which cabinet ministers are here and which are not.
Yes. Is that an indication then that perhaps the people here know that that's it for them?
Possibly. I mean, I think some of those behind us are perhaps unlikely to be in the cabinet of Andy Burnham. Some of them who were the most loyal and dogged defenders of Keir Starmer. Others might find themselves in different roles from the ones they are doing now. The human reality for a lot of the people here, firstly, let's be blunt, a lot of people here are losing their jobs.
Yeah.
When a Prime Minister loses their job, a whole host of other people lose theirs. Now, a lot of these people would acknowledge that the nature of politics is that it's volatile. They don't expect sort of violins around these moments. But at a human level, lots of these people are people that I deal with on a daily or weekly basis. They are losing their job as administration falls. So for them, at a human level, as well as at a professional level, because the nature of working in Downing Street is pretty all-consuming, it's an all-consuming life, is that a project that they imagined would have a longevity to it that might have extended to at least 4 or 5 years, potentially longer, is coming to an end after a 2, and that's something that many here will feel deep in their bones, a sense of how and why did it go wrong so quickly?
Yeah, I mean, it has been said all political careers do end in failure. On a practical level, that clearly is the case here, despite what Sir Keir Starmer is clearly going to trumpet as his achievements over the last 2 years.
Yes, relative to what he might have hoped for when you and I were talking about that exit poll and he had a majority of north of 150, and granted politics is very volatile, but you'd have put a reasonable amount of money on him having a decent crack at having a full parliamentary term, and we're not even at the halfway point. The halfway point of this parliament, if it runs to its full 5-year length, is at Christmas. We're not even at that halfway point, and it is coming to an end. Now, I think where he and the history books will reflect where he can point to some success was dragging the Labour Party off the canvas after the double defeat at 2 general elections back-to-back with Jeremy Corbyn as the leader. They had all of those problems around anti-Semitism, condemned as they were by a watchdog that looked into their record on dealing with anti-Semitism. And Keir Starmer regarded that as absolutely central to his mission in trying to make the Labour Party electable again. And he certainly did that. You know, there are very, very few Labour Party leaders who have won general elections, and he is one of them. And yet, once he had crossed that threshold into Downing Street a couple of years ago, remarkably quickly, I had senior folk in the Labour Party, in the government, fearful that in their view they were squandering the opportunity that they had. And that built up slowly, was principally whispered in conversations to folk like me privately for a reasonable amount of time, and then started to bubble up increasingly publicly, which is why we could bring viewers night after night as we chatted at 10 o'clock, the prospect that Keir Starmer's time might be limited. And here we see the final act, if you like, in that play.
Indeed. Do you see him going quietly into the night, sitting on the back benches, or do you think, given how difficult he knows this job is, and he wants Labour to succeed, obviously, that he's going to keep council a little bit better on the back benches?
So I think he said this publicly, that he will offer advice privately when asked, not publicly when not asked. So he isn't someone, I think, by demeanour or instinct, who will be sounding off in public frequently. He says he will remain as an MP for Holborn and St Pancras. That'll be a relief to Andy Burnham, because a by-election there, where the Green Party leader of England and Wales, Zach Polanski, might fancy a tilt, could be quite a lively thing. He hasn't ruled out, though, the prospect, Keir Starmer, of some sort of international job in the future. You know, you think possibly of NATO or the United Nations or the International Criminal Court. So I do wonder if there may be another act of Keir Starmer in public life beyond this job, but let's see.
Indeed. Annabelle, come back in. Annabelle Tiffin, North West political editor for the BBC. A bit of consternation, it has to be said, among many of the people here behind us and behind the polished black door, that Andy Burnham was looking at some kind of move to take over a year ago. Were you hearing those rumours around about that time?
Yeah, there has been rumours, I would say, probably going back a year. I spoke to his best friend, his ally, Steve Rotherham, last week, who said, no, it didn't go back that far. We did talk long into the night over a pint about it, but it was really whenever the opportunity would arise, and the opportunity hadn't arisen. And then, as we know, he tried to stand in the Gorton and Denton by-election, but was turned down by Labour's NEC, and then he got another opportunity, or there was an opportunity made for him to be able to stand in Makerfield when his friend Josh Simons stood down. Now, it is difficult to know exactly when he first started to think about it, but what Steve said to me was that they have thought about it for quite some time. As I said, they wanted the situation to arise, and it hadn't. When I spoke to Andy Burnham many years ago, he said, goodness me, who would ever want to stand to be Prime Minister again? This is in Theresa May days. And I said, well, you did try twice, Andy.
Yeah.
And he said, I know, but I can't imagine wanting to do it now.
So what was the trigger then? If we're going back a year, we're talking about literally 12 months after that huge majority was won by Sir Keir Starmer. What was it that he saw that was going wrong, even at that early stage?
Well, that's it, isn't it? What was it at the early stage? It did seem very early for him to suddenly want to throw his hat into it. But I think he had always had a taste for it. He couldn't quite get over the fact that he'd never become the leader before, so that taste has never ever gone away for him. I think he could hear the grumblings from local MPs in particular. You know, there are a lot of MPs that had been suspended from the party, a few in our area, for not agreeing with things that the government was doing, and also grumblings from the public, from the electorate, knowing that they weren't as happy as they should have been with the Labour governments that they had waited so long for. And if you do go out and vox, as you will do as well, and you go into places like Makerfield, into Salford, any of those places, they all say we've waited for a Labour government, and now we are disappointed. And I think Andy Burnham picked up on that and thought, right, this is my time now, but he didn't have any seat to stand in, and that was the issue.
Yes, waiting and waiting for change, that change perceived to be not coming, and this sense that perhaps Sir Keir Starmer was not being Labour enough, was somehow carrying on a policy of so-called neoliberalism that perhaps was a little bit too Blairite.
Well, that's the critique we hear from Andy Burnham. I'm keeping half an eye on the door, Clive, because I think in the next minute, perhaps less than a minute, in fact, the door is opening right now.
And here we go.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning. I'm about to visit His Majesty the King to offer my resignation and close the book on my time as Prime Minister. My work is done. In 6.5 years, I took our party from a historic defeat in 2019, changed it so it was fit to face the country, and won a landslide general election victory in 2024. Since then, it has been the privilege of my life to serve you and this great country as Prime Minister. And I am confident that Britain is now stronger and fairer than it was 2 years ago. Our economy is stronger. Our public services are on the up, with the biggest fall in waiting times for 17 years. Children are being lifted out of poverty every single day. Immigration is down significantly. Our defence and security are on a far stronger footing, and our international reputation is greatly enhanced. Yet the thing I will always take away with me, the most humbling aspect of this job, is the front row seat you get to witness the greatest things of this country in action. To see every day immeasurable acts of resolve, grit, decency and compassion from people who serve our country, whether that's in their regimental colours, NHS scrubs, or simply the millions of people in their communities who volunteer their time and their effort to the ground beneath their feet. We face a world now where our enemies will stop at nothing to divide us because of our values, our freedom, our decency, and frankly, because of our unflinching resolve towards the brave people of Ukraine. And so under this attack, it is vital that we remember the greatness of the Britain all around us, that while we debate how to fix our problems, there is something we inherit from our country and our character that can give us confidence, that we can change our country for the better, that we can create a Britain where every child can go as far as their talent will take them, and we can unite different people under our common flag if we don't succumb to that division. So, as I now pass the baton to Andy Burnham, I wish him every success. He has my full support. And finally, I want to thank once again my family, Vic and our children, my team, all the staff here and across the Labour Party, everyone at Number 10 and across the civil service, and everyone who has supported our efforts along the way. For all the focus on individuals, politics will always be a team sport, and the changes we've delivered for our country and our party belong to everyone who has fought for them. I thank them again today, and I thank the British people for the opportunity to serve. I go with good grace, I go with a smile, and I go proud of everything that we have achieved. Thank you very much.
Prime Minister with his wife, Vic, thanking all those people who've been behind him during his time here at Number 10. And now he makes his way to the Prime Ministerial car to head to Buckingham Palace to formally hand in his resignation as Prime Minister to the King. And within about an hour of that, Andy Burnham will make that visit too. Let's listen in.
You got a good one? Huh?
Sir Keir Starmer in that speech saying that he is leaving office with good grace and a smile on his face. He was greeted with applause when he left Downing Street. Left Number 10 to give the speech. Now applause echoes as he leaves and heads towards Buckingham Palace. Off towards Trafalgar Square, passing through Admiralty Arch and then heading up the Mall and onto Buckingham Palace. Chris Mason is with me. We talked about the fact that he would point to what he has achieved over the last 2 years. But he goes back a little bit further and he talks about where the Labour Party was before he came into office.
Yeah, a first reflection, Clive, as we see his car depart and we see some of his closest staff and aides mingle here, another Prime Minister has gone. Another Prime Minister. And yes, Keir Starmer reflecting on what he sees as achievements in office, but also those reflections on, as he sees it, reviving the Labour Party and bringing it back from its defeats under Jeremy Corbyn. But the extent to which he leans on that as part of his legacy tells you the story of how limited the window has turned out to be for him to achieve in office. Such was the impatience of his party at what they perceived to be a failure to deliver, and deliver sufficiently quickly and brutally, an unpopularity that they concluded was dragging them down. That's the root cause of these scenes that we're seeing behind us now, of Labour and Keir Starmer staff and ministers embracing, the odd tear shed there, and a really big moment for these staff.
All right. The Prime Minister then on his way to Buckingham Palace, where my colleague Fiona is standing by. Hi, Fiona.
Hi, Clive. Yes, well, we can see the car actually now just disappearing under the canopy of trees past St James's Park. It's just a very short journey from Downing Street to Buckingham Palace, a matter of a couple of minutes. Obviously for Keir Starmer, this is the last time he will visit the King as Prime Minister. The King will be the last person to address Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. We understand he's not going to be coming in through the main gates, but possibly through the north gate. There's all sorts of renovations going on at the palace, so things have changed a little bit. And you can see the crowds there, all gathering. Partly, I have to say, the tourists for the changing of the guard, but lots of people waiting here. There's a real sense of occasion, and lots of journalists here. All the people here know something important is happening. And Keir Starmer, as you see, the car there with his convoy, the police fore and aft, now making his way, actually coming up just behind me, coming into the area just in front of the palace, past the Queen Victoria Memorial, statue of Queen Victoria, of course, and as he arrives at Buckingham Palace, we will see his car drive in the gates. We can see it here, the police coming behind me, and there we have, Daniela, there we have the car arriving, and it looks like the car is going in. Is that the north gate or the central gate, Daniela?
The north gate. It's going the north gate, and there he is. One of the bizarre, quirky moments of British life. Sir Keir Starmer is arriving here while the military band seems to be playing a Bon Jovi medley on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. So an interesting moment. The music just stopped there. Sir Keir Starmer will now be driven into the central archway of Buckingham Palace, into the main quadrangle, which is where many people perhaps will be familiar when there have been investitures or arriving for garden parties and state events. He will be driven through into the quadrangle there, ready to meet the King with his wife, Lady Victoria. So an important show of constitutional monarchy that we are seeing here, of Keir Starmer arriving to meet the King. We can see the vehicles arriving here. This is the luggage door of Buckingham Palace. Now, this is not the luggage door.
Why is he coming in the luggage
What's happening here today is because of the work that is being done at Buckingham Palace. Major Ben Rigby there, he is the equerry to the King. Sir Clive Alderton shaking the hand of Sir Keir Starmer there. Sir Clive Alderton is the King's private secretary. He will know Keir Starmer and Lady Victoria very well. Clive Alderton, an absolutely key figure in terms of the relationship between the royal household and 10 Downing Street. So somebody that over the past couple of years Keir Starmer will know well. Into the luggage door, as I was saying, because of the renovation work at Buckingham Palace, they can't actually go in the normal routes that we would see this moment take place. So inside now, Sir Keir Starmer and Lady Victoria, they are going to be taken to the Chinese dining room as well. Again, not the normal audience room we would normally see a Prime Minister and King meet, but again, because of the refurbishment of Buckingham Palace, some of the normal routes and normal rooms are not in use. So things are a little bit different, but there is tradition in what is going to happen over the course of the next 20 minutes or so. So Keir Starmer will meet the King privately.
They will sit there on their two
They will be two chairs in this room. I mean, it is a new room to us, but we would expect it to be dressed the same way. Two chairs next to one another often. There'll be photographs of the royal family in the room. They will privately chat. There will be a single photograph of this moment issued a little bit later on. Sir Keir Starmer will offer his resignation. The King will accept that resignation, and then will be time for the two men to privately reflect on their relationship, on Sir Keir Starmer's time in office. The King will meet Sir Keir Starmer's family. His wife, Lady Victoria, his two children are here away from the cameras, as they always have been during Keir Starmer's time in office. And that will be it. There will be a goodbye, and that will be the final moment that Keir Starmer leaves here for this phase of his public life. And within minutes, we expect to see the arrival of Andy Burnham.
And for the King and Keir Starmer, there have been key moments in their admittedly brief relation. I mean, the King knew Keir Starmer, who was Director of Public Prosecutions, of course, and he'd come across him many times. But nonetheless, there have been key moments in the 2 years they've worked together, not least the visit to the United States, where relationships between America and the United Kingdom looked a bit rocky, and the King went there on an important diplomatic mission to try and smooth things over as much as anything else.
That's right, and of course nothing that the King does in terms of international travel happens without the Prime Minister and Downing Street wanting it to happen. It is very much a negotiation and a discussion between the royal household, the Foreign Office and Downing Street. So Keir Starmer will have very much wanted the King to go to the United States back in April to try and shore up relationships with the the Trump administration, which is what the King tried to do in his own way. So there would have been a lot of discussion. That relationship over the past couple of years between King and Prime Minister will have built. There was an obvious warmth and rapport between them when you saw them together. They meet every week, virtually every week for the entire year, either in person here at Buckingham Palace or over the phone.
And how important is that meeting of the year? Because it happens always, there's the hullabaloo of Prime Minister's questions. I mean, it's a bit of a bear pit in the House of Commons. And then straight after that, the Prime Minister leaves to come here to talk to the King. And suddenly you're in a completely different atmosphere and one of constitutional significance. How useful are those meetings?
I think they're incredibly useful for Prime Ministers. And of course, we don't know, because the whole idea of them is that they are completely private and they are secret, and they are a safe space for Prime Minister and King to discuss great matters of state or anything that is concerning them, or policy issues, that everyone can speak freely, that it won't be reported in the media. Some past Prime Ministers have perhaps been a little looser tongued about these moments than others. But what you totally get is a sense that for the Prime Minister, it is a real outlet for them to talk to the late Queen or to the King now, to sound them out, to call on their wisdom and guidance, to get a sense of how they feel about things and what their concerns are as monarchs. So I think it's a very important exchange of ideas and exchange of how they feel about the world. And I think both the King and the Prime Minister will have found that a very, very useful exchange.
And we used to hear, didn't we, that when the Queen was conducting these meetings on a Wednesday, she would signal the end of it by tinkling a little bell. I think it was Tony Blair who mentioned that, and then they knew it was over. I mean, I can't really see King Charles doing that.
I think there's a buzzer. Don't quote me on that. I think there is some kind of buzzer. But we've seen Major Ben Rigby there, who is the King's equerry, a very important figure in the Royal House, a sort of personal assistant in some ways, who will know how the King works, who will know roughly how long things are due to last, and perhaps a nod, a look. There'll be an understanding in terms of how long things should last, or when somebody should come in or out of the room. So he will be the person escorting Sir Keir Starmer out of the room today. So he will be the one that sort of has a sense of how long things will last. But we are expecting the meeting between the Prime Minister and King to be around 20 minutes, maybe a little bit less.
And then just looking ahead while the two men are talking inside Buckingham Palace behind us, Andy Burnham will arrive. Now, we don't know exactly when he'll arrive, but when Theresa May resigned to the King and Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, there were just 42 seconds between them, which makes one assume that Boris Johnson was circling in a car somewhere so that he could then get in pretty quick, and that in fact may be the case with Andy Burnham. We don't know. The important thing is that this transition is smooth and that it is quick and nothing interrupts it. And then there's this strange process which is known as the kissing of hands. Just talk us through that, Daniela.
Yes. Just on timings, Fiona, my gut is today that it will be quite quick as well, because the King has a number of engagements this afternoon outside of London. So as soon as
life just carries on.
So I mean, if you want to get a flavour of the fact that this is just a constitutional monarchy at work, he will do this now. The King see an outgoing Prime Minister and an incoming Prime Minister. He's then off. He's travelling around an hour or so outside of London for engagements for the whole of the afternoon. So I think that the move between Sir Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham will be pretty quick. Yeah, the kissing of hands, there is no kissing of hands.
Presumably there once was.
There once was. It's a historical reference, a moment of respect and deference that we just don't do in 2026. So that was where it comes from. But no, this is a handshake and a conversation today to mark the end of one Prime Minister's reign, for want of a better phrase, and the start of another term for a new Prime Minister. So there is no grand moment in this. I think what always strikes me, where you spend so much time here, we both have at grand state occasions, the royal family on the balcony.
And also the band performing behind us.
But this moment is quiet, it's careful, it's very smooth, and it's, it is private as well, a lot of it. That is about this smooth transition of power off the back of a time that has been quite bumpy politically. Today is something very different. The mood is different. The King has executive power. Today he is passing that executive power on to his new Prime Minister to execute it through his government. It is a very formal, choreographed, constitutional moment that will be very carefully handled.
Yes, it's interesting talking about the constitutional role, because the King, as it is described, can advise and warn. Quite how that warning would be expressed would be interesting to know, wouldn't it? But he can advise and warn, but otherwise that is it. But when it comes to the resignation of a Prime Minister and asking a new Prime Minister to form a government. That's something that only the monarch can do, and it has to be done in person.
Yeah, that's right, which is why the King is here this morning. He wasn't planning to be in London this morning because, as I said, he has these engagements out of London today, and he'd also spent the weekend at Highgrove, his private estate in Gloucestershire.
But yes, he only arrived about 20 minutes
exactly.
ago.
So he has had to come back to London to have this moment because, as you say, it has to be in person. He will be very conscious of wanting this to be right and proper and done correctly. So he is literally doing a very quick stop off here to see Sir Keir Starmer and to see Sir Andy Burnham, and then he will get on with his regular duties that have been planned for today.
And one wonders, again, to be a fly on the wall, Daniela, but one wonders how much King Charles's personal feelings can come into this. I mean, this is Keir Starmer, a man he's got to know over many years and in many respects has worked closely with.
Yeah, that's right, and you do always wonder how well do they get on, the King and Prime Minister, and do they need to get on? Is that an important part of their relationship?
Well, is it, do you think?
Not necessarily. I don't think they have to get on, but I think the King is somebody who I think would feel that for the stability of his reign, for the success of his reign, he will want to feel that he has a good, strong, challenging, working relationship with his Prime Minister. And I think that has evolved over the past couple of years with Sir Keir Starmer. We have seen them on a number of engagements together. We've seen them at state banquets, on Remembrance Sunday, at a number of official occasions. In fact, Sir Keir Starmer is part of a big project that the King has been doing around knife crime with the actor Idris Elba. Sir Keir Starmer has been very involved in a number of events surrounding that. So they will have got to know each other very well, and it will be important that it was important that was a successful and strong relationship, which I think it has been. We are now at a stage where there is going to have to be the forging of a new relationship between King and Prime Minister. We're told the King and Andy Burnham do not know each other well. They are familiar with each other. They have both been in public life for some considerable time in different ways, so they are familiar with each other but don't know each other well. So this will be the start of a whole new relationship from the moment they meet here a little bit later.
And just looking at the glorious pictures there of Buckingham Palace in the sunshine, I mean, it really looks picture perfect today in this wonderful weather. I mean, this is still a place of enormous constitutional importance, but not somewhere for the first time that the monarch is going to live. So how is that going to change its importance in public life, do you think?
Yes, we've learnt in recent weeks that the plan is not for the King and Queen to move back into Buckingham Palace.
And in fact, they've never lived there,
no,
have
they haven't. They have always been at Clarence House, which is smaller, cosier, for want of a better phrase.
And it was the former home of the Queen Mother.
Exactly, and somewhere that the King and Queen clearly feel much happier, and they are leaving Buckingham Palace to be the official headquarters of monarchy. So it'll be still where we see garden parties. When the refurbishment is finished, it will be where state banquets and state visits are hosted. There is also the possibility of opening up Buckingham Palace now to the public more often for more weeks in the year, because there won't be a King and Queen in residence. So still very much the symbol of monarchy here, but not where the King and Queen will actually live day to day.
And Charles has been king for, 4 years so far. This is his 4th Prime Minister in this time. I mean, this has become a very familiar procedure for him.
Yeah, very much so. He knows what he's doing here in terms of saying goodbye to one Prime Minister and welcoming in another one. I mean, it's an extraordinary number, isn't it, to have seen 4 in 4 years, and perhaps not what he anticipated after the death of his mother. He would not have thought that it would have played out in this way. But you have to remember as well, he was the longest serving Prince of Wales that was here. He was incredibly politically engaged. He has a great understanding of state affairs, of the working of government, of figures in Number 10, in the Foreign Office, of ambassadors around the world, of the Commonwealth. He brings to the role a huge wealth of knowledge in terms of the Constitution and of politics and of state affairs. So he's incredibly well equipped to deal, I suppose, with the churn of Prime Ministers here, but even he will have found it quite surprising, I think, that he's had to deal with so many of these moments during his short reign so far.
Well, I'm sure he's not the only one to be surprised. I mean, our politics has changed dramatically in the last few years, and we are all living through it. Because Andy Burnham now we don't know exactly where he is, but I assume he's not far away, and he will be preparing for his first audience with the King, where the King will ask him to form a government. I was looking up on the royal website last night, and it's saying there are 2 responses to that question. I can't imagine anyone has ever said no, but clearly if you are the leader of the party with the biggest majority in the Commons, you can you command the confidence of the House of Commons, that is going to be your role. I mean, that is quite a moment, isn't it?
I think in this moment, historically, if you go back, there have been some moments where prime ministers have asked for if they could just have a pause to check that they can do this, and so sometimes it's not quite as smooth.
Well, I don't think that's going to be Andy Burnham's problem this morning.
I think it's going to be very clear that he knows that he is going to be able to form a government. He will tell the King that, and then I suspect there may be some conversation between them about what that government will look like and what its priorities will be. But it will be really interesting from my job here as senior royal correspondent to see how that relationship between King and Prime Minister evolves. They're not two men who seem on paper very similar. There are other prime ministers that have perhaps felt a little bit more similar to the King in terms of background and school and experience. Andy Burnham and the King have very different life experiences, but I think there is a lot of common ground. We saw Andy Burnham with the King just last year in Manchester visiting Heaton Park Synagogue after the attack there, and you could see there was obviously a lot that they wanted to talk about in terms of multi-faith engagement and communities working together. There is a lot of common ground between the two men, but it will be a relationship that now has to grow and evolve.
Well, certainly Andy Burnham at least has not called for the abolition of the monarchy, as Keir Starmer once did. I think that is a view that he left behind, and certainly his relationship with the King, as you say, seemed very warm. And I'm struck by the fact that Keir Starmer today, as prime ministers have done in the past, will have brought his children along. I mean, the children that we have not seen, they have very deliberately kept their lives private and out of the public eye. But they are coming along as well. So they are marking this as a hugely important moment, obviously in Keir Starmer's life, but in the life of the family as well.
Yeah, I think it's a reminder, isn't it, that this is both a constitutional moment but a deeply personal one for Sir Keir Starmer too. We know that he and his wife, Lady Victoria, have worked incredibly hard to keep their children, their teenage children, out of the public eye, but the royal household will have offered the invitation to come here today for the whole family, for Sir Keir Starmer to have his private moment with the King, but for then his wife and his children to join the King in the Chinese dining room, and for them as a family to have a moment with King Charles. So it is a definite personal outreach on behalf of the royal household, and a very important moment clearly for them as a family, closing the chapter on this phase of Keir Starmer's public life.
And much sooner than Keir Starmer would have anticipated. He went into the palace through the North Gate, as we saw, at 11:25, so one assumes they are now, Keir Starmer and Lady Victoria, in conversations with King Charles. I mean, it's a great moment of state, but it's a very human moment as well. I mean, whatever one's politics are, it's clear that this is something that will have brought enormous sadness to Keir Starmer, that he has been in office, 2 years and just a few weeks. He had great plans, they have not come to pass as he would have wanted them, and he is effectively being booted out. And in fact, when he leaves Buckingham Palace, and Andy Burnham arrives, Andy Burnham will arrive in the front and all the attention will be on him. It will all change immediately to Andy Burnham as the next Prime Minister. And Keir Starmer, what was it, David Cameron once said, "I was the future once." Keir Starmer is out the back door, and as far as we don't know where he's going. I mean, it's over.
It's brutal, isn't it? I mean, it really is. This moment here at Buckingham Palace is a very visual moment of the end of one Prime Minister's term. And it's tough going, I would think, for Sir Keir Starmer and his family. And his day, it's a day of contrast in so many ways. The transition of power itself, overseen by the King, is quiet and smooth compared to the noisiness of Downing Street or the noisiness of the House of Commons. It's a very different mood here today, but on that personal level as well, you have this personal, quiet moment tinged, you have to be thinking, tinged with sadness, with regret, with reflection, perhaps from Lady Victoria especially, a little bit of relief as well. Possibly. In terms of this all coming to end after an incredibly bumpy few weeks and months for the Prime Minister. But it is a very personal family moment, as you say, and that is why Sir Keir Starmer has his wife and his 2 children with him here today.
And just thinking in the 4 years, it was a very short time that Charles has been king. So he started off with Theresa May, so she was Prime Minister for just over 3 years. Boris Johnson, again, just over 3 years. Liz Truss, of course, 49 days, as the tabloids had her in competition to see if an iceberg lettuce would last longer than her in office. Rishi Sunak, just not quite 2 years. And then the only Prime Minister that's been elected which is Keir Starmer, 2 years and just a few weeks. I mean, that turnover is extraordinarily rapid, and that is something that the King has to deal with, not find political favour with one way or the other, but just in his role, as we were saying, he can advise, he can warn, but that is it.
That's right. So the King has had 4 Prime Ministers in 4 years. So we're talking Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, Sir Keir Starmer and now Andy Burnham. So he has had to develop and create a new relationship with 4 completely different personalities, with 4 different politicians who have different priorities, different interests. And the King will obviously have his own interests and worries and concerns and things that he cares about. So he will have to be navigating those relationships with each of those individuals. And it's fascinating to think quite how those relationships play out, perhaps more so because we just don't know anything about those audiences, and those are the key moments where the relationship between Prime Minister and monarch develop. And because we don't actually know what goes on in those audiences, there's a lot of speculation and questioning and wondering quite what it's be like. Who was his favourite? Who did he get on with?
And of course, we see the pictures,
Yes.
as we saw the pictures with the Queen, of course, with Theresa May, and with Boris Johnson, and with Liz Truss. I mean, and the Queen, of course, died very soon after. Keir Starmer has now tendered his resignation. The King has accepted. Clearly, there's no question he's not going to accept it. The King has accepted. And I guess now is the time where they will just, as you say, reflect on perhaps the things that they have undertaken together. And I imagine, on a human level, what Keir Starmer will do next, where he will go with his life. Presumably stay on as an MP, we don't know, but other projects that he and the King may share.
Yes, and it may be that their relationship continues beyond him being Prime Minister. As I said, there are a number of projects, particularly around young people, around social cohesion, that Sir Keir Starmer has been working with the King on. They may well continue in a different way when he is no longer Prime Minister, when he is an MP. That won't go away. He will remain a well-known public figure who has been involved in certain projects alongside the King. So it will be a goodbye to Sir Keir Starmer today in terms of him being Prime Minister, but I suspect their relationship will continue, ongoing beyond this moment as well. So it's a big moment. We know that Buckingham Palace now has confirmed that the resignation, as you say, has been received, and that has happened. He has tendered his resignation, and now there will be this time for perhaps some more informal moments of the conversation around their shared experiences that they've had together over the past couple of years, perhaps around the incoming state visit of President Trump, around some of the projects they've worked in together, visits they've made, particularly one visit to Cornwall that the King and Keir Starmer made together around social housing and the development of rural communities. So there'll be lots to talk about, as well as bringing in the family and having those conversations too.
And meanwhile, the pomp and circumstance
still goes on
outside. And so, Danielle, listen, you see this stuff all the time. Is this still the remnants of the changing of the guard?
Yes, exactly. It's the departing guard as part of the changing, now leaving Buckingham Palace. This is what the vast amount of this crowd will be here to see.
Yes, because let's face it, the tourists, many of them, with the best one in the world, will have no idea what's going on politically here. And they want to come and see the ceremony that takes place.
Exactly, and that is changing of the guard. So the crowds have been here for around 10:45 to watch the comings and goings of this version of changing of the guard, because the moment actually going on inside, this huge constitutional moment, is without colour, is without ceremony. That is a private, quiet moment, but changing of the guard is a big moment that most of the tourists are here to see.
And of course, one hates to think how hot they must be in those outfits and their bare skins.
Yeah, absolutely. They are well trained, they are very used to it. They have found themselves at all sorts of occasions, particularly recently trooping the colour, where it was absolutely baking hot. So they train in this heat. The horses are well practiced in doing this, and it is an absolute key part of the tourist experience of.
And we have now the official picture of Keir Starmer tendering his resignation, of Keir Starmer tendering it to King Charles. See, that's the Chinese drawing room. So amongst, politics can be a brutal, down dirty business, but there they are in the very elegant surroundings of Buckingham Palace, and a very friendly picture, I'd say.
Yeah, very much so. And this is the only picture we will have of this moment. There is no video of this moment, no film of it. It's just this one solitary image of one Prime Minister saying goodbye to the monarch, which in a world where so much of it is played out live and played out visually for us, it's interesting that this incredibly important constitutional moment is just one single image. But yeah, that is effectively Sir Keir Starmer's goodbye to King Charles.
And of course, Keir Starmer will be aware that as King Charles is saying goodbye to him, King Charles is mentally preparing to welcome the next one.
Yeah, that's right. He'll be well aware of the timings, of knowing that Andy Burnham is just in the wings, ready to come into Buckingham Palace. The King also aware that he has to be somewhere as well later on this afternoon. So there'll be some timings and a timetable that he will be trying to keep to. But he also won't want to rush this moment. The King, has a humanity to him, and he will understand for the Starmer family that this is an incredibly important moment. He won't want to rush it, and he will want to make sure everybody has the time they need for a degree of closure, to say goodbye and to leave this very public role.
And it's a very formal occasion. I mean, Andy Burnham, we don't usually see him suited and booted. He's normally in his dark t-shirt and dark jeans, but one assumes he's going to be anything but today when he drives in. And so is it going to be the same for him, as far as we know? Or will he drive in the main entrance, would you expect? Or because of the renovations, again, be going in the North Gate, in through the luggage entrance?
Yes, yeah. We don't know exactly which gate he will go into. It is, in this situation, it is usually the departure of the new Prime Minister that is the big moment, rather than the arrival of him here.
Of course, because he's then on his way to
Exactly.
Downing Street, where he'll make his speech.
Yes, exactly. So again, that image, here we have a couple of other images here from this moment of the King and Sir Keir Starmer together, saying their goodbyes in the Chinese dining room of Buckingham Palace.
Yes, surrounded by all the gilts.
Yes.
And the pictures and the antiques. And yes, that's a very, very different call from Downing Street, isn't it? But that's, as you say, a hugely moment, and a hugely important moment for Keir Starmer, but no doubt a very emotional moment for him, I would think. I mean, this has not ended as he would have wished it. I mean, Prime Ministerial life very rarely ends well. It's usually because people want you to go, and that has been the case with Keir Starmer. Of course, Andy Burnham's come in, he's not elected, but he has the support of the Labour Party for now. And we await his arrival here at Buckingham Palace, but for the moment, these are our images of the last man, the monarch, who will call Keir Starmer Prime Minister.
That's right. The King will have welcomed Sir Keir Starmer into that room with probably a Good Morning Prime Minister, becoming probably the very last person to address him in that way. I think it's also important to remember that Sir Keir Starmer announced he would be resigning around a month ago. So it may well be that the King and Sir Keir Starmer have talked about this moment during their audiences in recent weeks.
It would be odd if they hadn't.
Yes, exactly. So there will have been a degree of conversation and understanding of why this was happening and what Sir Keir Starmer's thinking has been in this moment. So it won't have just landed today. There will have perhaps been a bit of build-up between the two of them to understand what is happening. But an important personal moment for Keir Starmer, and a real show of constitutional monarchy and the role of the King in this moment as well.
And also the fact, when we've mentioned it a couple of times now, as has Clive in Downing Street, the calm, quiet transition. This is not Capitol Hill. This couldn't be further from it. This is, we've got all the tourists there. There's no sense of unrest or unease. This is, a glorious picture here, bathed in sunshine, and inside, everything is planned meticulously to the last detail. The arrival of the current Prime Minister, his resignation, his departure, and then swiftly after, possibly even less than a minute after, the arrival of the new Prime Minister. This is planned to the last detail.
Very much so. There is a real dignity in this moment, I think, which is very much what Buckingham Palace would want and Downing Street would want as well. And perhaps that's why we haven't seen any moving pictures of it. Occasionally we do get a little bit of, we're allowed in the room for maybe 30 seconds when the King meets the Prime Minister, but not today. It's just those couple of photographs, images that we have to illustrate this important moment for Keir Starmer and for the King. And I think it allows for us to understand the importance of privacy, for Sir Keir Starmer to be able to talk freely to the King, for the King to be able to talk personally to Keir Starmer in this moment as well. Not in front of the cameras, something that happens privately, quietly, away from the rough and tumble of politics. What has been an incredibly difficult time for Sir Keir Starmer, and we know for his family, he has spoken about it. Today is dignified, it is quiet, it is reflective. That's the mood of this moment here today.
And much as we cannot know, and with good reason, about the private conversations going on between the monarch and Sir Keir Starmer, equally, Andy Burnham is around here somewhere, waiting for his moment to come. It would be wonderful to know exactly what he's thinking. Let's talk to Chris Mason at Downing Street. Chris, I mean, Andy Burnham waiting in the wings, as I say. This is, I mean, he's tried twice to be leader of his party. He is now without an election. He is about to become Prime Minister. This, I mean, you can't stress how important a moment this is for him. Chris, we can't quite reach you at the moment, so let's just stay here at Buckingham Palace for a moment. But that's certainly where attention is turning now to Andy Burnham, who'll be arriving here shortly. And again, will the process be the same, Daniela? He'll be met by the equerry, he'll be taken through to the Chinese drawing room. We expect it to be the same,
That's right, yes. He will be driven in with his family through the gates of Buckingham Palace into the main quadrangle. He will then be parked at the luggage door, this entrance that they're temporarily using because of the work that's being done on the palace.
I mean, that is a wonderful detail, isn't it? Coming in through the luggage door.
The luggage
you might be
door.
about to lead the nation or depart your leadership
Yeah.
of the nation, but you're going in through the luggage door.
He will be met by Major Ben Rigby, the equerry to the King, and also, very importantly, Sir Clive Alderton, who is the King's private secretary. The Prime Minister and the King's private secretary will get to know each other very well in the weeks ahead.
And how closely do they work together then? What is that relationship?
Yeah, Sir Clive Alderton, the private secretary, is the main communication between the King and his government, really. He is the person who will be liaising with his team, with Downing Street, with the Foreign Office, on matters of state, on international travel, on the arrangements for the weekly audience. He is a key figure. He is himself someone who worked at the Foreign Office, was an ambassador for a number of years, so very much understands the world of international diplomacy and state matters here in the UK. So he is a very influential figure. He will welcome with the equerry Andy Burnham and his family to Buckingham Palace and take them up to the room in which they will spend some time with the King.
So we can see the scene here at Buckingham Palace with the crowds. They've seen the changing of the guard, but many crowds still here. Clearly a sense of occasion. They know that something important is happening here today. We've got the Royal Standard flying over Buckingham Palace. Earlier on it was the Union Jack, and that was taken down as the King arrived. He landed by helicopter, I believe, not far away. In the grounds of Kensington Palace, came here by car, and of course as he arrived, coming through the main gate, the Royal Standard was raised, as it always is when the monarch is here. And then at Downing Street, we can see the pictures there. I mean, it all looks very quiet when you look at it from that angle. What you cannot see behind the camera is serried ranks of journalists from all around the world, all with their little spot, all wait, there you have it, all waiting for the moment when Andy Burnham is going to come out and tell us something about what his premiership will be. We've had little hints through interviews. There have been interviews with the newspapers, people close to him have come out and spoken, but we don't really have a clear idea, not only who is going to be in his cabinet, heading these great departments of state, but also quite what they will be doing. And there, again, we see the crowds at Buckingham Palace. Keir Starmer, we believe, is still within the palace. Sir Keir Starmer, Lady Victoria and his children who we have not seen. They've very carefully kept them out of the public eye, as they are doing today, no doubt as they will continue to do. But they are inside having their meeting. Is it unusual, do you think, Daniela, that it's taking this long? Or I imagine, you know, this is a very personal moment for them and they want to make sure that they don't rush it and they give the moment the dignity it deserves.
Exactly.
Let's talk to Chris Mason, who's at Downing Street for us. Chris, we're waiting here as Keir Starmer, as we understand it, is still in Buckingham Palace. And then Andy Burnham will arrive here, and then soon, of course, we'll come to you and make that all-important speech with or without lectern outside number 10. And that will be our first instance, really, of getting a clear idea of what our new Premier is about.
Yeah, that's right, Fiona, and it's a reminder, isn't it, as we look at the pictures on the screen now, of the nature of today, which is simultaneously ceremonial, deeply personal, and then, of course, political. So right now, a penny for the thoughts of the outgoing Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, in conversation with the King, having just given that address that we brought you here in Downing Street, half an hour or so, 40 minutes or so ago. And then perhaps even more so, a penny for the thoughts racing through the mind of Andy Burnham right now as he anticipates heading into the palace for that conversation with the King, perhaps a moment that he may have imagined in his mind down the years. It's 16 years since we first became aware publicly and explicitly of Andy Burnham's ambition to be Prime Minister. When he first stood for the Labour leadership in 2010, he was unsuccessful then, unsuccessful again 5 years later in 2015, and successful at the third time of asking. So his ambitions to be the Prime Minister have been long-standing. They have built very, very gradually for a long time, only to suddenly happen very, very quickly in a short period of time. In fact, some of those who've been advising Andy Burnham were anticipating him having the whole summer to prepare for this moment. And because the Prime Minister, the outgoing Prime Minister Keir Starmer, decided not to contest the leadership, and because nobody else sought to contest the leadership alongside Andy Burnham, the process has been much shrivelled compared with what it might have been. And so he and a very, very close number of advisors have been working up in pretty short order their plans for government in the last couple of weeks. And now he stands on the threshold of exactly that. And within the next 45 minutes or so, he'll have completed his conversation, his appointment with the monarch, and will then head down here to where I am in Downing Street to address the country for the first time as Prime Minister. And then for him, the real work, the hard work, really begins.
Well, yes, and Chris, we understand from Buckingham Palace that Keir Starmer has now left the palace. That is the end of his political life as Prime Minister. He is now once more an MP, or he will be the moment that Andy Burnham is asked to form a government by the King. An important constitutional move. It has to take place this way. Andy Burnham will, of course, accept. And from that moment on, Andy Burnham is our new Prime Minister. So we assume, Chris, that he is waiting in the wings somewhere. He will come here to Buckingham Palace. We will see his car arrive. That audience will happen with the King. And then he is whisked straight off to Downing Street. And then the pace of life will change dramatically for him. And we are so close to him officially becoming our Prime Minister, Chris, but we still have not the clearest idea of exactly what kind of Prime Minister he is going to be.
Indeed so. So the choreography is now playing out. It's a choreography, isn't it, that we've become very familiar with in recent years, such as been the frequency of prime ministerial turnover. He'll head in to be invited by the King to form a government, having been recommended by the outgoing Prime Minister as being the person who can command a majority in the House of Commons. That's what gives the Prime Minister the capacity to govern, and frankly, in the end, that's what did for Keir Starmer, because his own side concluded that they wanted rid of him. And then, as you say, Andy Burnham will come here to Downing Street. He has been, partly because of circumstance and that shrunken timetable I was talking about, but also because of a strategic decision to do it this way, he has been very limited in what he's been saying in the last few weeks. He's done very, very few interviews. His public appearances have been rationed as well. We learned, courtesy of an interview that he gave to the Times this morning to Patrick Maguire, that there were just 3 people involved in what are known as the access talks that the incoming Burnham administration had with the civil service. So it was Andy Burnham himself, it was James Pennell, his chief of staff, and Louise Haigh, the former cabinet minister who's been very close to Andy Burnham in recent months. I know from talking to cabinet ministers in the last week or so, and indeed more recently than that plenty of them have been in the dark about their own prospects, their own future, either in the job that they are still just about currently doing, or any job that they may subsequently be doing. And Andy Burnham's been painting in pretty broad brushstrokes. We've heard, haven't we, about his desire for greater devolution, this idea that Number 10 will have an office in Manchester, Number 10 North. I suspect we'll see the new Prime Minister, as he soon will be, visiting there in the coming days. We've had a sense about his commitment to social care in England, talking very movingly in that interview in the Times this morning about his father, Roy, a lifelong Labour man living with Alzheimer's, unaware that his son is about to become a Labour Prime Minister. And then also a tax detail that we were talking about with Clive a little earlier, that Andy Burnham has talked about. I say a detail, it's hugely significant and comes with a huge bill potentially, which is this idea that the personal allowance, the amount of money you can earn before you start paying income tax, in Andy Burnham's view has been static, has been frozen for too long. So to what extent might he be able to shift that, and with what consequence and with what trade-offs elsewhere? But that's almost the sum total really of what we've had from Andy Burnham. How much does he develop that argument here in Downing Street in the next hour? Incidentally, we think he may do that without the lectern that we saw the Prime Minister, the outgoing Prime Minister, speaking at in the last hour. And then to what extent over the next week or so do we start getting additional details from Andy Burnham? The expectation is that he will seek to hit the ground running, and we will see and hear a lot of him and his new cabinet in the coming days and then in the next week or so.
So, Chris, we can see Andy Burnham's car now arriving down the Mall. We could hear the whistles of the police before we saw the car. The north gate to Buckingham Palace has been opened in preparation for his arrival. Police holding up the traffic. And there we see the convoy and the police escorts as Andy Burnham makes his way into Buckingham Palace, where the King will ask him to form a government. This is a big moment for our country, of course. This is our new Prime Minister in that car in the middle, one assumes. But also it's a massive moment for Andy Burnham. And this is something that one gathers from sources that he has been preparing for more than a few months. And this moment has come. So, Daniela, look here, we see him coming into the, same as the quadrangle here. Look, we can see some of those renovations taking place you've been talking about. But he comes here into the quadrangle. The gravel has all been swept, has in preparation for his arrival.
To hear the crunch of the tyres on that gravel in the quad, and just to emphasise the speed at which things move here as well. We have had the official statement from Buckingham Palace about the last audience, just to say the Right Honourable Sir Keir Starmer MP had an audience with the King this morning and tendered his resignation as Prime Minister. Lady Starmer was also received by the King. That moment is now past, and here we are.
Here is Andy Burnham with his wife, Marie-France Van Heel.
That's right, being met there by the equerry to the King in the uniform, Major Ben Rigby, and their Sir Clive Alderton, the private secretary to the King, who is directing them in through the luggage door from the quadrangle into Buckingham Palace for this new phase in their public life, politically and personally. They will go to the Chinese dining room here in Buckingham Palace. We're told one of the most ornately decorated rooms in the palace, which is temporarily being used as the audience room. In that room, Andy Burnham will meet the King. The King will ask him if he is able to form a government. Andy Burnham will say yes, and that will be it. He will be Prime Minister, and there will then be some time for the two men to chat. You would think about priorities, about Andy Burnham's plans while in government and as Prime Minister.
I mean, it's possible, Daniela, the King may be the first person to find out who's going to be in the cabinet, because as Chris has been saying, as we all know, it's been a closely guarded secret. So it would be fascinating, wouldn't it, to be part of that conversation, because it's all been, Andy Burnham it's all happened very quickly. He's played his cards pretty close to his chest. And now the King is going to have a conversation, as you say, about his priorities, perhaps the direction of government, how they might work together. So he will probably be the first person to hear the kind of details that we will later find out.
Yes, it's hard to imagine that the King would not be asking him about the formation of his cabinet, about his thinking, about how close he is to having that complete and ready to announce. That is just the kind of thing that the two men will talk about. they aren't two people who are particularly familiar with one another. Yes, their paths have crossed during their own public lives. Andy Burnham, when he was previously as Secretary of State, now as Prime Minister, there have been moments where we have seen them together, but they don't know each other well. So this is what we are seeing here, and what is going on now behind the palace walls will be the start of a new, very important relationship in British public life.
And Chris Mason in Downing Street, I mean, for Andy Burnham, as we've said, twice he's tried to be Labour leader. He is now going to be Prime Minister in very short order, and this has happened very quickly, perhaps more quickly than he might have wanted it. You were saying he perhaps might have wanted the summer to prepare for this. How important a moment is this for him personally?
It's a huge personal moment, isn't it, this, for Andy Burnham. You saw him there with his wife. Just rewind a handful of months and remember the Labour Party that he now leads barred him from being the Labour Party's candidate in a by-election, that by-election in Gorton and Denton in Greater Manchester, which the Green Party went on to win. And here we are a matter of months later, and he's in conversation with the King, being asked to form a government. Within the next half an hour or so, perhaps 35 minutes, he'll be a little over or round about a mile away here in Downing Street, addressing the country for the first time as Prime Minister, then heading into Downing Street and writing those letters of last resort that are handed over to the commanders of the UK's nuclear armed submarines, and the gravity of office will descend upon him. It's a reflection that so many of the prime ministerial memoirs reflect upon, that within moments of getting behind the black door in Downing Street, when the likes of you and I are still in conversation about what we've just witnessed, that is what confronts a prime minister. And that's before they get to the difficult political business of having to sack cabinet ministers from the previous administration that they don't seek to retain, and then the more joyous moment, if you like, of calling people in to take on those senior jobs in a new government. But yeah, a collision of the constitutional, the personal and the political, all happening at once. And for Andy Burnham, this moment he has long dreamed of, long dreamed of, happening, but as I say, happening rather quicker than he might have imagined. That has meant something of a sprint in the last couple of weeks, principally taking place away from the cameras, as he's tried to knock together what his government might look like and what might be viable to deliver in office in the first weeks and months, and then begin the process, as he has been doing, of assembling that team that will be unveiled one by one in the coming hours. We expect the key appointments to his cabinet, the most senior positions, Chancellor, Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, probably from mid-afternoon onwards. Further appointments taking place into the evening tonight, and then the many appointments to the more junior ranks of his government tomorrow.
And Daniela, just looking again at those pictures of Andy Burnham arriving with his wife, and he will be the UK's 59th, I think, Prime Minister. And as you say, he's met King Charles before, when the King was Prince of Wales, as Culture Minister, as Health Minister, as Mayor of Manchester. He was at the coronation. They've had a number of events together. But they will now have a different relationship, because every week they are going to be meeting after Prime Minister's questions, and obviously Andy Burnham will hope that his relationship with the King is going to last rather longer than Keir Starmer's did. But these are two men who are going to have to work well together.
Yeah, and it's interesting watching these pictures again there, the warm handshake from Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary. He will be an absolute key figure in the relationship between King and Prime Minister, because Sir Clive is the King's closest personal, private advisor. He will know the King's thinking. He will know what interests him. He knows how to navigate the relationship between the royal household and Downing Street. So he will be a key figure in the formation of this new relationship between King and Prime Minister. It's interesting to see him being the first person really who greets the new Prime Minister as he enters Buckingham Palace today. But an incredibly powerful personal moment for Andy Burnham and his wife going in to Buckingham Palace today. When he leaves that Chinese dining room, having had his audience with the King will say goodbye, Prime Minister. I mean, that in itself, just those,
that's a moment.
Few words are a real moment for any individual, and particularly for someone who has spent so much time in public life and in politics. It is a real moment for him to know that it has been a personal ambition of his for such a long time, to see it play out as we will do today. And when we were talking earlier about when you read any memoir or biography of any past British Prime Minister, this short amount of time that they spend here at Buckingham Palace in this moment, it's just so important for them personally, as a family, politically. It's a moment that they take office, really, that they officially become Prime Minister, and it has such impact, as you would imagine. And just in terms of some of the timings as well, that we know that Sir Keir Starmer, we think, was inside with the King for around half an hour from beginning to end, so perhaps a little bit longer than we thought, but there was no fixed time on this, and the King will not have wanted to have rushed Sir Keir and his family in this moment. And then around 7 minutes or so between Sir Keir Starmer leaving, we think, and Andy Burnham arriving here. So a few minutes there, but the King, as I said, have these engagements outside of London this afternoon. So he will want to, for want of a better phrase, a quick turnaround if possible. Yeah.
Very business-like.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, 7.5 minutes. I mean, I noted earlier on that when Boris Johnson took over after Theresa May, it was a mere 49 seconds between Theresa May departing Buckingham Palace and Boris Johnson arriving, a sign perhaps of his enthusiasm for the job and to get going. And slightly slower, perhaps slightly more dignified transition this morning. And other than the King asking Andy Burnham to form the next government, that form of words, as far as we can tell, I mean, these conversations are private. We can speculate to a certain extent, and based on what previous Prime Ministers have said, how does the conversation pan out?
Yeah, I mean, initially there will obviously be a conversation about whether Andy Burnham is able to form a government. Now, there's a very first question that is asked by the King. The formalities of the conversation is how things will start. But then it will move much more, I think, to the more personal political perspective. What are his priorities going to be? Where is he at with the formation of his cabinet? What is his intent for the next few months? How does he feel about the role? So you can expect the King is a great small talker as well. It's a sort of it's a part of the job, part of the role. But he will have some direct questions he will want to ask, and he will have his own political interests that perhaps he will want to discuss with Andy Burnham. Maybe not at length today. That's not what today really is for. It's an introductory meeting, a chance to forge the start of this new relationship they will have as monarch and Prime Minister, one that will then be built on with the weekly audiences that happen on a Wednesday over the course of Andy Burnham's premiership. Also, we're heading into the summer break now. The King will begin his own summer holidays later on this week, where he will head to Scotland and stay on the Balmoral estate. And actually at the end of August, beginning of September, there is usually a weekend where the Prime Minister and their family come to Balmoral, are hosted by the King and Queen there. So
it's referred to as a dine and sleep over, which I found rather charming.
Yes, exactly. So there will be a weekend where Andy Burnham and his family usually will be invited to Balmoral, and you would think that would be an opportune moment for the two men to really get to know each other better, to get an understanding of who they are and what their interests are heading into the autumn term and the busyness of public office once Parliament is back and once the King is back to regular engagements.
Yes, I remember Tony Blair, or was it Cherie Blair, talking about the staying at Balmoral. There are a number of details, probably best not to go into at this time of day, but and the famous barbecues and the slightly surreal nature of all that.
I mean, many people will perhaps have seen it watching The Crown. There is a whole episode devoted to a Balmoral weekend with the Prime Minister. And yeah, I mean, you would have to, Andy Burnham and his family will have to understand the niceties of a country weekend in Scotland with the King and Queen. There will be routines and rhythms and choreography to how that works. But I'm sure the King will want to make him and his family feel welcome. And it is a moment to really get to know each other a little bit and get to understand who you both are as individuals and what your priorities are.
And there's an element of that today, isn't there? I'm struck by the fact, well, Keir Starmer arrived with his family and Andy Burnham has arrived with his wife. I imagine there will be conversations about how family life is going to change, how their personal circumstances are going to change.
Yeah, 100%. And the King will be very much interested in that personal aspect. I think, when are you moving? Exactly where will you be living? What about your children? Andy Burnham's children are in their 20s.
Here we
have it.
It is something uncanny about it, Daniela, isn't it? They're in the same room. King Charles on the right, Andy Burnham on the left, just as it was with Keir Starmer. But here we have the moment after the resignation, the welcoming of Andy Burnham as Prime Minister. That, for Andy Burnham, one cannot underestimate what that must feel like. Chris, I mean, this is something that Andy Burnham, I mean, I think it's not too much to say he's probably dreamt of.
Yeah, that's the moment, isn't it? Andy Burnham becoming Prime Minister. As you say, it is quite something, seeing that image in exactly the same spot, against exactly the same backdrop as the now former Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, was in just a handful of minutes ago. Seeing the smile there on Andy Burnham's face, an ambition for much of his adult life to one day be the leader of the Labour Party, and yes, so he hoped, the Prime Minister. The last two times, you know, he contested the Labour leadership, it was to become leader of the opposition. This time, no contest, no rivals for the Labour leadership position, and at a time when Labour were in government. So in just that matter of days from becoming Labour leader on Friday, there he is in Buckingham Palace, becoming our fifth Prime Minister in 4 years. And whatever is to come, as Keir Starmer has reflected in the last couple of weeks, whatever is to come for Andy Burnham in the coming weeks, months and years, this a moment, and the moments to come in Downing Street here in the next half hour or so, that he will forever reflect upon, no doubt, at a personal level, with a deep sense of pride. But the hard work about to begin. He does have a couple more ceremonial moments, if you like, both the remaining conversation that's currently ongoing with the King, and then a brief moment of respite in the car as he travels down the Mall and then down Whitehall to Downing Street. And when he gets here, Fiona, what I can tell you is a gathering of Andy Burnham's keenest personal supporters are just gathering at the bottom of Downing Street. It'll be interesting to see if they are choreographically assembled in a similar way to the semicircle that gathered behind Keir Starmer an hour or so ago. It'll also be interesting to see if there are any overlapping names. In other words, those who were invited to Keir Starmer's departure and Andy Burnham's arrival. I suspect quite a few will have only had an invite to one of those two occasions rather than both, although I am told there is a little bit of overlap. It will be intriguing to see how much of a Mancunian flavour there is in that welcoming party for Andy Burnham. But yes, that conversation with the monarch ongoing, that brief bit of respite on a very short car journey down just a couple of streets, 3 streets in total, I suppose, the Mall, Whitehall and Downing Street, before we hear from Andy Burnham as Prime Minister for the first time here in Downing Street in the next 20 minutes or so.
And Chris, we're seeing more pictures now of that moment of Andy Burnham, our Prime Minister, and King Charles in the Chinese drawing room, wreathed in smiles. This is such a moment for Andy Burnham, as you say. And I wonder, Chris, if you feel, I mean, as he's got to hit the ground running when he gets to you in Downing Street, just 3 streets away, as you pointed out. This is the calm before the storm, if you like.
It is, yeah, and the beginnings, just seeing those series of images that we're looking at on screen now, the beginnings of what will be a crucial relationship for Andy Burnham, as it is for every Prime Minister, that relationship between Prime Minister and monarch, that source of wisdom and longevity that the King brings to politics and diplomacy, having granted only been king for a handful of years, albeit with a good number of prime ministers now, but his time as Prince of Wales before that. But crucially, as you and Daniela have been reflecting, the sanctity of the relationship that a prime minister and a monarch have, those weekly audiences where a prime minister can be utterly candid about the political scenarios that they are wrestling with, knowing, perhaps unlike any other conversation they have with almost anyone, that the nature of that conversation, the content of that conversation won't leak to folk like me and others, that the King can be there as a sounding board and a source of advice without any wider political axe to grind. But yes, to come to your question, Fiona, that sense of the wanting to hit the ground running. Yes, his team have been making clear to me and others that is absolutely his desire. I think they are aware that they, in their guarded approach to the last few weeks in terms of their public statements and appearances, that they need to contrast that once he is in office, with being seen and seen frequently, audibly and visibly around the UK. I suspect he'll be out and about around the UK in pretty short order in the next couple of days. And then trying to walk the balancing line, the tightrope of delivering within the scope of Labour's manifesto, which gave them their mandate to govern a couple of years ago, whilst being distinctive, whilst proving, as he hopes to be able to offer something different. And then, and this is always the balancing act as well, how do you promise something that gets you noticed, that raises the prospects and the popularity of the Labour Party, which has been rock bottom and contributed to Keir Starmer's demise, whilst at the same time not creating too big a gap between expectation and rhetoric in these opening, quite heady days for a new Prime Minister, and actually the capacity to deliver. That is a tricky old challenge that will confront Andy Burnham straight away.
And just looking at these pictures of Buckingham Palace bathed in glorious sunshine. Daniela, you're still with me here, and we've had confirmation, I mean, as if confirmation were needed really, of what's taken place in the meeting.
Yeah, what we've had, Fiona, is a formal notice as well from Buckingham Palace that this meeting has happened. If I just read it to you from the Palace, it says, His Majesty received in audience the Right Honourable Andrew Burnham MP and requested him to form a new administration. The Right Honourable Andrew Burnham MP accepted the King's offer and kissed hands upon his appointment as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury. Miss Marie-France Van Heel was also received by His Majesty. So that is the confirmation from Buckingham Palace that Andy Burnham is now Prime Minister. That moment described as the kissing of hands. There is no kissing of hands.
Yes, let's be clear about that in case people are wondering.
It's just it's a traditional turn of phrase that harks back to moments in history that no longer happen. But it is a handshake, as we have seen in these photos we're now looking at here. It is a conversation between a monarch and his new Prime Minister. That is what is going on now. We are expecting Andy Burnham to be leaving here, Prime Minister Burnham to be leaving Buckingham Palace shortly. And when he says his goodbyes here in the Chinese dining room of Buckingham Palace, where the audience is happening, a temporary room that is being used while the palace is having some work done, it will be the King and perhaps those from the royal household that greet him will be the first people to address Andy Burnham as Prime Minister.
And what a moment that will be for him. And just as Keir Starmer, our former Prime Minister, left through the back entrance, I mean, saying he wasn't coming out the front, we assume that our new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, will come out the front with all the pomp and splendour, the full convoy for everybody here to see.
I think so. The crowd has dispersed a little outside the palace now after changing of the guard, but I can see from my position here with you, Fiona, the police outriders lining up ready for when Andy Burnham's, Prime Minister Burnham's vehicles leave Buckingham Palace, and we are expecting them to escort him with the full police escort that comes with being Prime Minister down the Mall to Downing Street, where we will hear from him for the first time as Prime Minister.
And then as far as the monarch and our new Prime Minister meeting from here on in, you mentioned that there would be this stay at Balmoral, you were saying, in the summer, perhaps in August. The weekly meetings obviously happen while Parliament is in session. Are they expected to get together over the summer? Other than that, generally, do they tend to be meetings, or does that tend to be put in abeyance while the King takes a break and Andy Burnham puts together his government?
I mean, there will be a break built in, so the meetings may not happen in person, but they will happen in some form. They will talk over the phone. There will be a little hiatus for the summer break, but there won't be a huge long break between now and the King returning to public duties in the autumn. And there are things to discuss, of course, in terms of the Prime Minister's relationship with the King. There is a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting at the end of October, beginning of November in the Caribbean that both will be involved in. Andy Burnham may have some views on where he would like the King to go internationally in terms of shoring up the UK's relationship with other countries around the world. There may be an incoming state visit. Who is coming to visit us here? Who are we hosting? All of those conversations Andy Burnham will now be part of.
And Chris at Downing Street, paint a picture for us of what's happening there. It sounds like you were right. There isn't going to be a lectern. I can just see a microphone. So that is a break with tradition. But I can see crowds gathering there, a real sense of anticipation.
Yeah, absolutely right. So the Downing Street staff are out with the good old gaffer tape, which always makes an appearance on days like this, to mark the spot normally where the lectern stands. But as you can see, this is a set of microphones without their good friend, the lectern. The lectern has been retired. There is no sign of it. That has been indicated by Andy Burnham's team over the weekend, that he would be dispensing with the lectern. I think this is part of his desire, Fiona, to continue to project the sense of communication style that we became used to, and certainly people in the northwest of England became used to during his time as the mayor of Greater Manchester, which was to be much more informal than... Sorry.
I was just going to say, what are we to read into that? Is it trying to say there is no barrier between me and the people I'm talking to? Is that the sort of visual clue that he's trying to give?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the visual clue he is trying to give. And as they test the microphone right now, Andy Burnham's assembled crowd of supporters is taking up position either side of the main entrance to 10 Downing Street. So they're assembling. I'm trying to see who amongst the crowd I recognise and whether there was any overlap with the party that saw Keir Starmer out just a matter of an hour or so ago. Yeah, it looks like there's members of his family in and amongst the people gathered here. But yeah, on that point, Fiona, about style and communication, yes, to a degree it might seem superficial, but Andy Burnham is of the view that some of the familiar tropes, if you like, of politics, bluntly a lot of blokes wearing suits standing in front of lecterns, act as a barrier to people's willingness to engage and be interested in what political leaders are talking about. Now, we saw those there in those still pictures from the palace that Andy Burnham decided he would wear a suit and tie for an appointment with the King, which I guess we shouldn't be that surprised about, but I think he will dispense with the suit and tie whenever he can as Prime Minister. And the absence of the lectern, as outwardly trivial as it might seem at one level, is an attempt by him to project a sense of difference, that he is going to try to approach doing this job differently, not just from his immediate predecessors, but from those before that as well.
And Chris, are you getting any sense, looking at the crowd gathering there opposite you outside number 10, who's in and who's out? I mean, this is what we all want to know. It's been a very closely guarded secret so far.
Yes, it is a closely guarded secret. It certainly has been. It's difficult to read much into it from the assembled gathering of friends and family and wider supporters. We wouldn't expect those who are likely to be taking senior public-facing jobs in his administration to be necessarily in and amongst the crowd. Look, to make an obvious but very human point about a day like this is a crowd gathering, all of whom are wearing smiles and are wearing and projecting a sense of jubilation, a sense of victory, a sense of occasion. And you contrast that with what we saw just an hour or so ago with the departure of Keir Starmer, where yes, there was a sense of pride, but ultimately the demeanour was one of sad reflection, rejection, dejection, failure really, because they had hoped that their Prime Minister would be around for much longer. In fact, I just see walking up the street, Fiona, Steve Rotherham clutching his grandchild. He was proudly posting on social media that he'd become a granddad in recent weeks. Steve Rotherham is the mayor of the Liverpool City region and a long-standing ally of Andy Burnham, the two of them as mayors of the Liverpool City region and Greater Manchester respectively, until Andy Burnham was elected as the MP for Makerfield. So we see Rotherham Jr. taking up a pretty prominent spot outside the door of 10 Downing Street, ahead of his friend Andy Burnham arriving here in the next 10 minutes or so.
Well, we hear, Chris, in fact, that Andy Burnham will be leaving Buckingham Palace here in the next minute or so. So get ready for his arrival. And then, of course, once Andy Burnham leaves, Daniela, the King's business carries on as usual.
That's right. I mean, it is a reminder of the role of monarch, isn't it? This is just a little change of plans in the diary for this morning, meaning the King had to return to London to see this constitutional moment play out. But then he will leave here pretty much as soon as Andy Burnham leaves Buckingham Palace to go to a number of engagements this afternoon outside of London. He's got a journey of an hour or so outside of London where the normal business of royalty continues, and he has a number of engagements around the country, on the eastern side of the country, over the course of this week before the King himself goes off on summer break. So we are now looking at the luggage door in the quadrangle of Buckingham Palace. It is where we will see the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, depart after his audience with the King, where the King asked him to form a new government and Andy Burnham accepted. So he will depart there shortly. It's feeling a little bit like it's going to be roughly around the same amount of time as Sir Keir Starmer spent inside Buckingham Palace, but we have someone on a stopwatch keeping an eye on the minutes of how long each man was inside. But roughly the same time as the King meets his new Prime Minister, meets Andy Burnham's wife as well, and he will then leave here to go to Downing Street.
And of course, it's as we've been saying, it's a moment of calm for Andy Burnham. One has a feeling it's going to end pretty soon. We're seeing people beginning to come out of the wonderfully named luggage
very unglamorous luggage door
as we go on. But this is the first meeting, not the first meeting between our monarch and Andy Burnham. They have met in the past, because of course Andy Burnham was in government, he was in opposition and was Mayor of Manchester. But the first meeting they have where, for the King, Andy Burnham is going to play such an important role.
That's right, and I have over the past couple of days been trying to look into whether Andy Burnham has ever said anything about monarchy before, about how he views the royal family, and he hasn't said very much at all about it. It's hard to get a sense of it, but there have been some official statements when he was Mayor of Manchester that he made about monarchy, particularly after the death of Queen Elizabeth II, where he talked about her providing consistency for the British people, and that her, as Queen, as monarch, defined what it is to be British. So perhaps you get a sense that he looks rather favourably on the role of the royal family in public life. After the coronation as well, he spoke about building strong bonds of friendship with the King, particularly around the King's relationship with Manchester, with Greater Manchester. But again, the flavour of his public comments around the royal family have generally been quite positive, with him having a view that they have the capacity to enhance the reputation of Britain and to enhance public life. So the mood is that he has generally a positive feeling towards the royal family, but we will learn much more about that as the relationship between King and Prime Minister evolves.
And how important is it that the King has a favourable view of the Prime Minister? Does that matter at the end of the day?
I don't know that it matters, but I think it makes life feel a lot easier if they have a good working relationship, that they can have honest, robust exchanges that are kept private, that the King can voice his concerns, that he can learn more about the running of government. And I think it adds to the sense of a stable monarchy if there is a strong, solid, challenging relationship between King and Prime Minister. They won't always agree, of course. They are two men from very different backgrounds with very different perspectives, but there are clearly some common ground around social cohesion, around multi-faith communities, that they will definitely find some common interests in some areas where they can work together.
Such a contrast between the images we're seeing here. Downing Street, the serried ranks of journalists, of people from inside Number 10, of supporters of the new Prime Minister, all there waiting with a great sense of anticipation. And here, the calm at Buckingham Palace. We've got the tourists here, but their numbers have mostly thinned out because they were predominantly here to see the changing of the guard, and then suddenly were treated to this constitutional handover, if you like, as the police convoy arrived with Keir Starmer and the outriders and all the grandeur of that. And then this little door in Buckingham Palace, and the moment that Andy Burnham walks out that door is the first glimpse that we will all have of Andy Burnham as Prime Minister. And then when he makes his very short way to Downing Street, just 2-3 streets away, we will get our first perhaps proper sense of what Andy Burnham as Prime Minister means for all of us. And that's presumably, Chris, there at Downs. I can see Steve Rotherham again with his grandchild so proudly displayed. But that's what everyone is waiting for there at Downs. Not only to cheer on the bloke they support, of course, but to get a clearer sense of what's coming down the track for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely right. So people here have their smartphones out. They're doing selfies in and amongst the crowd. It's a rather thicker crowd, broader crowd numerically than those that we saw gathered for Keir Starmer's departure. As I say, there are one or two overlaps of advisors who are being kept on from one administration into the next. I think we just spotted Andy Burnham's mum here. Who else did we see? We saw Peter Reid, the footballer. He was involved and photographed with Andy Burnham during the by-election campaign in the Makerfield constituency a couple of months ago. Dale Vince, the Labour supporter, I think he's wearing a T-shirt that says "Chips are vegan." He's just turned his back to me, so I can't quite read it. I think it says chips are vegan, which I guess they are, aren't they? So the crowd gathered expecting to see their man, to see the new Prime Minister in the next few minutes.
Yes, well, we all wait with anticipation to see quite when he will come out of Buckingham Palace. As Daniela, as you say, there's someone with a stopwatch time in all this. Can there be no sense of favouritism, longer or shorter with the outgoing Prime Minister and longer or shorter with the incoming Prime Minister? So, yes, people getting ready. I suspect that man was coming out to check that the cameras are recording. Yes, they are. We are all here waiting for that moment. And I suspect for Andy Burnham, I mean, this, walking out of the palace outside this gloriously named luggage door is not going to be the moment. But having had that meeting with the King, being asked formally by the monarch to form a government, that is a moment he is never going to forget.
No, I mean, a hugely important moment for him politically and personally, for both him and his family. And actually, when he emerges from that luggage door there, it will be a very quiet moment. There aren't that many people in the quadrangle of Buckingham Palace. There'll be a little bit of peace. He'll be aware of the helicopter that is above us here. But the moment the vehicles drive out of the central gates through the main gates of Buckingham Palace onto the Mall, he'll see the people. He'll get a sense of going to Downing Street to deliver his first speech as Prime Minister. And I suspect it will very much come home to him, just the power of this political moment. But the King, for him personally, a chance for him, as we have talked again and again about this establishing of a new relationship, an important one that will be so key to both the King and to the Prime Minister in the months ahead.
You also get a feeling, Daniela, that politics is a dirty business. It gets down and dirty. But when you're Prime Minister, you come to Buckingham Palace and you're surrounded by the grandeur and the tradition and the centuries of history of the building. You emerge from here, you drive down the Mall, past the flags, past the Clarence House, past the grand buildings. I wonder if that's the moment where it really sinks in. You think, right, this is it now.
I think especially for a man who prides himself on his informality and perhaps not being so impressed by these
and
moments.
Here he is, Daniela.
Here he is, Sir Clive Alderton leading out the new Prime Minister and his wife, Andy Burnham, the new Prime Minister, waving to those collected in the quad of Buckingham Palace. He will now be driven out. Major Ben Rigby there, saying goodbye to the new Prime Minister and his wife, and Sir Clive Alderton, the Private Secretary of the King, saying their goodbyes, and into the vehicle they go. Andy Burnham, the new Prime Minister, was inside for 35 minutes. It's just a touch longer than Sir Keir Starmer was there.
But let's not.
A competition.
Who's counting?
It's
Who's
not a
counting,
competition.
Daniela? Yes.
So very similar times that they spent inside the Chinese dining room inside Buckingham Palace for that audience with the King. And the vehicles now pull out, the police outriders prepare as the new Prime Minister leaves Buckingham Palace.
Yes, we wait for his car to emerge from the quadrangle. We will see that any minute as it comes out. And there are the police outriders holding back the traffic, holding back the tourists, and here comes the convoy of cars, gleaming in this warm sunshine as Andy Burnham, Prime Minister Burnham, makes his way to Downing Street. There we see the cars departing at some speed, it has to be said, through the traffic, leaving Buckingham Palace. The outriders speeding past a red traffic light, but that's not a problem for them. They can go straight through it, down the Mall. There we see it. Through the parks on either side. It is a glorious sight, it has to be said, as they make their way. Take, what, 2 minutes possibly? As they come down the Mall, they'll be making their way towards Admiralty Arch. And there we have the 3 cars with the Prime Minister in the middle and the police outrider, another police car at the very back, escorting them through the traffic, such as it is, not waiting for the traffic lights. They don't have to worry with that as Prime Minister. And now they will make their way just a little bit further along the Mall as they approach Admiralty Arch. Admiralty Arch, which of course was part of the Department of Defence. It's now a hotel actually, but it was an important government building until relatively recently. Andy Burnham and his wife sitting in the car, no doubt reflecting on the meeting they've just had with the monarch. Chris, I could hear the cheers. They've obviously realised there that Andy Burnham has come out of Buckingham Palace and they're all agog to see him there.
Indeed so, yeah. So the crowd here absorbing the fact that their man, Andy Burnham, is the Prime Minister of the UK and is now just a matter of moments away. We're keeping an eye on the Downing Street gates, halfway down Whitehall, manned, as you know, by police, armed police, 24 hours a day. They will be keenly aware that the motorcades will be heading down Whitehall any moment, and Andy Burnham, I guess, keeping an eye on what he's about to say, because the absence of a lectern means that he won't be reading his speech from notes, which is the convention. He will be talking from whatever he has memorised. So perhaps, Clive, I guess, a chance for him to quickly check those notes before he's addressing us in just a moment or two.
Indeed. Fiona and Daniela at Buckingham Palace, many thanks for that. Talked a lot about changing of the guard over there. It is literally a changing of the guard. We now have a new Prime Minister who will be arriving here in the next couple of minutes or so. Yes, as Fiona was suggesting, going through red lights, not a problem there. Thumbs up for one of the photographers, just
2
making
minutes,
sure
I think that was.
yeah, that seems to be the 2-minute call. And of course, when he arrives here and he goes through those gates, he will be greeted by the smiling faces of so many of the people that he's worked with over the last few years up in Manchester. People who have been with him from the very beginning of this new political journey. Remember, he did serve in the administrations of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. He's used to coming to number 10, but certainly not for the last few years. But now he is coming as top dog, literally. And so he will see the people here lined up along the street here, wishing him well. And some of these people could well be working with him in the new administration. Chris, I'm struck by the speed of all of this. The fact that literally a month ago, he was a mayor of a local city, but
the gates are opening at the bottom of Downing Street. You can hear a cheer in Whitehall. The lead Range Rover coming through those gates leading the motorcade into the street. You can see the police outriders behind them. Trio of cars, I think, coming down towards the base of the street. A thumbs up from the Mayor of the Liverpool City region, Steve Rotherham, clutching his grandchild, as we mentioned. The car door about to open with the new Prime Minister in that Range Rover, and Clive, he'll be wandering up to the microphone shortly and no doubt greeted by cheers. Here he comes. By his wife, Marie-France, stopping to greet some of the friends and family who come to see him arrive in Downing Street as Prime Minister for the first time. Every inch formal dress for the new Prime Minister on this occasion. Suit and tie and buttoned as well. What a moment for the new Prime Minister to soak up. Previous Prime Ministers have said for all of the difficulties that come in office after this moment, this is one to cherish on a human, on a family level, with those who helped bring this moment about. Rosie Winterton there, the veteran Labour figure, being greeted by Andy Burnham. And that's Josh Simons, the MP, now former MP, who gave up his seat in Makerfield in Greater Manchester in order for Andy Burnham to run as an MP, clearing his path for this moment.
Indeed, what a political journey this has been for Andy Burnham. Literally just a month ago, Mayor of Greater Manchester, and now he's here.
As a mayor,
that's right,
embraces a former mayor.
That's right. So we've got Peter Reid, the footballer, who campaigned for him in Makerfield, in the white jacket there. Became leader of the Labour Party just last week, now he's Prime Minister, with the keys to number 10, and he's about to give his first speech as leader of the United Kingdom.
This is Andy Burnham embracing Kevin Lee, long-standing aide. He's been at Andy Burnham's side for way more than a decade. And here he comes to address the country as Prime Minister for the first time.
I have just come from Buckingham Palace, where I have accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government. In doing so, I am acutely conscious that I am the 6th person in the last 10 years to walk up this street, the 7th Prime Minister since 2016, making this a moment for reflection and new resolution. It requires my generation of politicians to raise our game and rise to the new challenge. Britain needs to show the world that we can regain our stability once again. And that is our challenge, to make politics work, to make it work better. I know people at home are fed up with politics. I hear you, and I want to be honest with you. We have not been good enough, and we need to be better. We will be. We will make this moment a circuit breaker for Britain, bringing forward the biggest changes in the last 40 years. A new political model and a new economic model. In the 1980s, Britain took some wrong turns. Political power was centralised, economic power privatised. Large parts of the country deindustrialised and they still haven't recovered. Many feel as though they're still in decline and they don't have the ability to turn things around. And that's why we will change politics, to make it more collaborative, more about problem solving than point scoring. And we will take power out of here and carry it into every postcode in the land so that they can do more. And in doing more, build a new economy where we put life's essentials back under stronger public control to make them affordable to you again. Reindustrialising Britain, using public procurement to back British industry. Later this year, I will bring forward a new plan for Britain, a 10-year plan, laying out a path from where we are now to where I believe we all want Britain to be, wherever we're coming from, whatever party we support. But I can do something to give people some breathing space now, some help with the cost of living. And I will set out some of those measures starting tomorrow, including how we pay for them. We will help more young people into work by changing the education system and giving them more support, more mental health support. And we will build more council homes. That is the fair and sustainable way to bring the welfare bill down, to meet our fiscal rules and to honour our commitments on defence to our international partners. We will help people to live well, building a more preventative state, investing in people's success rather than paying for failure. And that work starts now. I will soon go through that door behind me and issue my first instruction to end rough sleeping in our country. It's about putting the right values and the right standards at the heart of government. I will put the care of people at the heart of everything I do. I will give this my all, and I ask you all to pull with me. Let's build a new national sense of unity, of common purpose and positivity. Let us make this the moment when Britain starts to believe again, the moment we bring back hope. Thank you very much, everybody.
The new Prime Minister there greeting some of his supporters here who've come down from Manchester, and a speech with no notes where he talked about a 10-year plan, a new strategy for Britain. He talked about creating a new economic and political model for Britain, and that this was a circuit breaker moment for the nation, a change to the way things have done that will reverberate down the years. Chris Mason is with me now. Chris.
Just the image we were just seeing there, Clive, is the Prime Minister embracing his mum. So talking to his mum there, standing proudly on the steps of 11 Downing Street as Andy Burnham completes his greeting of his supporters to our left of the door of Downing Street. before he heads in through the main door. Turns out we were just getting in the way of the camera shot there, so we're ducking out of the way. Very shortly, we should see the new Prime Minister with his wife walk through the doors of number 10 for the first time. Here it comes.
A kiss for his wife, Marie-France, there. And applause inside, greeted by the Cabinet Secretary, who will introduce him to the staff of his new home. So, there you have it. There he is inside on his first day, the first moments of his premiership. A project that he says is the beginning of a 10-year strategy to completely remake British politics and to fashion a new economic model. Annabelle Tiffin is with me here. Annabelle, you're our northwest of England political editor. This is a moment not just for the new Prime Minister, but also for these people who've been with him every step of the way.
And I was really having a good look. I was waving to a few people because when you work in the region a lot, you do know these people. And, you know, you obviously had Steve Rotherham there with his 10-week-old grandson. You had people like Rose Marley, who's worked with him for years. Kevin Lee, who's his advisor, who's really got him to where he's been to today. Aruj Shah, who's the Oldham Council leader until a little while ago. So, yes, some of these people have been with him from the very, very start. And it will be really emotional for them to have finally, you know, see the man that they've been trying to get to here for certainly a few months finally walk through that door. And, you know, it's a big thing for the Northwest. Whatever your politics, we now have a Northwest Prime Minister, which we haven't had for more than 50 years. So it's a big deal for our region, it really is.
He talked about one of the first things he was going to do as soon as he crossed the threshold of number 10 was to institute some kind of strategy, some kind of new policy on rough sleeping.
Yeah.
How much of a problem has that been in Manchester? We know it's a problem in all of our big cities, but tell us about Manchester.
Well, this was one of his first things that he wanted to do when he became mayor. And he gave a percentage, still does, I don't know if he still will, but he gave a percentage of his wage to help rough sleepers. And he did say he was going to eradicate rough sleeping. I think he said it by 2020 initially, but that hasn't happened. I mean,
so this was up in Manchester?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was one of his first pledges as Greater Manchester Mayor, was to eradicate rough sleeping. It hasn't happened. There is still a problem with rough sleeping. It has gone down in numbers, but it hasn't been eradicated. So it's interesting. I found that quite interesting that he made that one of his first pledges to do it on a national scale. I mean, it's huge.
Absolutely huge. And given the fact that, as you say, it hasn't been as successful as yet under the timetable that he set himself up in Manchester. I mean, is he setting himself up for a fall?
It's difficult, isn't it? Well, that's why I was quite surprised he said it, because it is one of the criticisms he sometimes gets laid at him, is that he hasn't actually managed to do that and do what he actually said about rough sleeping. So, well, we'll see, won't we, I suppose, whether he can actually achieve it.
And on that exact point, there is a desire, you can get a sense of his desire to project it as a big message on day one, Clive, because this morning, and we should be able to bring you the pictures shortly, Andy Burnham was out and about 6:30 this morning, meeting people who were rough sleeping, serving in a kitchen and emphasising it as a key early promise.
Just to say that it's 1 o'clock and there is no 1 o'clock news as such. We're going to stay with the pictures here and tell you more of the story of this transfer of power with the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, now in number 10. Chris, you were saying that this is something that's close to his heart, clearly. Not as successful up in Manchester as he hoped he would be. But he's also talked about a lot of other things in that brief statement that he gave that are going to cost money. Indeed. Where's this money going to come from?
Quite, and that's a big early question. Now, he did nod, didn't he, to the fact that later this week, in fact starting tomorrow, he's going to set out what he describes as a 10-year plan with some more specifics about what he wants to do. And there was a line in there where he said, and how it will be paid for. I think, picking up on the conversation you were just having there with Annabelle, part, I think, of the different style that he's seeking to project as Prime Minister. Yes, part of it was addressing us there without a lectern, and so he was ad-libbing. He'd clearly learned a speech that he was delivering without notes and without an auto cue. And I think the visit that he has been on this morning, at the crack of dawn this morning, to a homeless shelter and meeting people rough sleeping, as someone who is hours away from being Prime Minister, is also trying to project that sense of someone who wants it to be known from the outset that he's, as he sees, a grassroots pavement politician who has become Prime Minister, rather than, if you like, the other way round. Just one other thought, Clive. Right now, as we see the melee here of some of the Prime Minister's keenest supporters, many from Greater Manchester, others from beyond. I just see over your shoulder Josh Simons, the former MP for Makerfield, who made this happen by standing aside, creating that vacancy in the Greater Manchester seat that Andy Burnham now represents. Andy Burnham is behind that door. He's just been clapped in by the Cabinet Secretary, the lead civil servant, and lots of other Downing Street civil service staff, and will be taken into a side room, and the gravity of office will descend as he signs those letters of last resort to the commanders of our nuclear submarines and begins the awesome responsibility of being Prime Minister. Yes, he's held high office, executive office in Greater Manchester, cabinet office in previous governments under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, but this is on a level sky high compared with them. And how does he approach that? How does he find it? How does he deal with all of those trade-offs that he'll start confronting right now?
Yeah, Annabelle, going back to his time in Manchester, given the style and change of style that we've talked about, you know, no lectern, a little bit more relaxed, perhaps a better communicator than Sir Keir Starmer, has that been able to override those policy areas where he hasn't been successful in Manchester? For instance, with rough sleeping, has that bought him a little bit more time? Because at least he's, in a way, telling the public, I'm trying, I'm making an effort here on your behalf.
Well, I think evidence would say yes, because he has remained so popular. So he was only elected back in 2024, and he did do extremely well. I mean, it was incredible. His popularity sort of goes beyond any other Labour politician, and while other Labour politicians in the 2019 election were losing their seats throughout Greater Manchester, throughout the North West, Andy Burnham remained very, very popular. So he has been forgiven for quite a lot. I mentioned earlier when I was speaking to you about the clean air zone, that was such an unpopular policy, which he initially said, well, the government wanted me to do this, but he did initially agree with it and then went back on it. And there are a lot of people still angry, but he's been forgiven for it. And I think that whole, I mean, it's interesting seeing him in a shirt and tie. We find that really strange now. You know, we're so used to seeing him.
Even the button done, as I mentioned.
I know.
Well. You know, this is the picture of formality.
It is, and it's so odd. And you know, we'll have to get used in the North West to calling him Prime Minister, not Andy. And it's things like that, because he has very much been hands-on. He's very hands-on with the press. He knows us all by name. He gives certainly across that personality of being every man. That doesn't mean to say that he's always lovely and fluffy and kind. I've seen him getting quite, as we say in the north, chippy at times, especially with people who came at him about the clean air zone. So, yeah, he's popular, but he has an edge. He certainly has an edge. Well, you have to, don't you?
Chris, I'm interested in this idea of a new politics, the biggest change in British politics for 40 years. I mean, he's talking big here, no question about it. You know, a new political and economic model. What's he driving?
It's a very, very lofty ambition, isn't it? To talk about politics changing to a greater degree than it has for 40 years. Not only the critique that it's, in his view, there's been this 40 years of neoliberalism, as he puts it, and he means that as a insult. He is talking about the records of previous Labour governments, as well as the records of those you might expect a Labour Prime Minister to criticise, the likes of Margaret Thatcher and John Major. So how does he actually deliver what he sees as a new politics? Well, I think an element of that is the stylistic approach that he will bring, or he hopes to bring to the job. Let's see if that does survive the rigours of an office the like of which he has never previously held. And then as far as an economic model is concerned, again, let's see to what extent can he make sizable and noticeable differences in the matter of maximum a couple of years prior to a general election. That has to happen within 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, Annabelle, he talked about a more collaborative politics as well, taking politics and the work of this place around the country. Was he collaborative with his opponents and those on the other side of the aisle up in Manchester?
Yes, I would certainly say he did. It certainly give across that impression. He worked very well with other council leaders. A lot of them in Greater Manchester, of course, are Labour anyway. But say, for instance, if you take Stockport, it was no control for a long time, but it had a Liberal Democrat leader, and they worked very closely together. This combined authority did work extremely well with the 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester. Having said that, I mentioned Stockport. Another failure he might say is his housing policy, and having to get all the boroughs of the combined authority to agree to his housing and his building policy, and Stockport didn't. It wouldn't go in with him. So it hasn't always completely worked for him. But yes, he has had quite a good collaborative approach, and I think is he coming back out?
Cheers for a photo call outside the shiny number 10 door there.
Yeah, so I think, that's certainly one of his big things, isn't it? With this Manchesterism, it's having a more collaborative approach to politics, which I think it is fair to say he did do quite well in Greater Manchester.
But Chris, he talks about, sticking to the fiscal rules, following the fiscal rules. He talks about bringing the welfare bill down. He talks about building more council homes. He talks about investing in defence.
Yeah.
There seems to be a lot of money piling up, and I'm not entirely sure there are many people wondering where that money's going to come from.
Quite. I think it's worth a couple of splashes of scepticism here. One is, how on earth do all of those things add up? Now, we clearly haven't got a lot of the detail around a lot of them, but we know in which direction the arrows are pointing, or in the direction the arrows Andy Burnham hopes are pointing in, whether it be increasing defence spending, staying within those fiscal rules, what he does about welfare. The other thing I thought is worth noting, because my goodness, it'll be noticed by opposition parties and it'll be noticed by senior figures in the Labour Party as well. He talked about a desire for stability. Well, he's been quite keen on this job for quite a while, and a by-election came about in which he found a path that has led to this moment. Now, he will make an argument to say that the Labour Party here at Westminster, the Parliamentary Labour Party, were agitating for an alternative to Keir Starmer because of Keir Starmer's unpopularity. Those close to Keir Starmer will say that Andy Burnham has been a persistent sort of fly in their ear or buzzing around their head for a long time.
Yeah, he said he's acutely conscious of the fact that he's the sixth person in the last 10 years to take position here. the constant churn of prime ministers is something that he pointed to, and yet he's the product of that.
I suspect Keir Starmer, if he has decided to watch events in Downing Street in the last half hour, his eyebrows will be on the ceiling, hearing that particular line around stability. Now, look, there's nothing wrong with ambition in politics. There's nothing wrong with aspiring to be Prime Minister. And clearly, Keir Starmer, the patience that Labour MPs had for Keir Starmer ran out, and the party collectively viewed Andy Burnham as their most popular alternative leader. Let's see how popularity encounters being Prime Minister, because as we were reflecting a couple of hours ago, Clive, the reality of being Prime Minister in recent years has to become unpopular very quickly.
Yeah, I think we can hear a little bit now, if you missed it, of Andy Burnham's speech. Let's hear what he said.
I will bring forward a new plan for Britain, a 10-year plan, laying out a path from where we are now to where I believe we all want Britain to be, wherever we're coming from, whatever party we support. But I can do something to give people some breathing space now, some help with the cost of living. And I will set out some of those measures starting tomorrow, including how we pay for them. We will help more young people into work by changing the education system and giving them more support, more mental health support. And we will build more council homes. That is the fair and sustainable way to bring the welfare bill down, to meet our fiscal rules and to honour our commitments on defence to our international partners. We will help people to live well, building a more preventative state, investing in people's success rather than paying for failure. And that work starts now. I will soon go through that door behind me and issue my first instruction to end rough sleeping in our country.
Yeah. Andy Burnham there speaking just a few minutes ago. Downing Street is beginning to empty now. The work begins for the new Prime Minister. And some people still posing for photographs there. What a moment this is for them, for those people who've come down from Manchester, for this changing of the guard. Faisal Islam, our economics editor, is with us. This whole idea of a new economic model. I think people will be scratching their heads and wondering, well, what does that mean? I mean, he has talked in the past, hasn't he, about Britain taking a wrong turn in the 1980s, that power was given up to private entities, taken out of the hands of the public. Is that what he's talking about? A retrenchment back to the 70s and 80s?
I think that is a political argument about the economy, and I think that it's very much facing what, in his terms, what Reform and Nigel Farage have been managed to sort of capture the imagination of a certain section of the electorate, and he's offering an alternative kind of story, basically, and he's trying to blame the right. That's what's going on there. What in substance does it mean for the economy? As we were talking about before, he's just gone into Downing Street. He is no stranger to the Treasury. He was Chief Secretary there, and his story, as he has written, is that the decision-making in the United Kingdom over the past 30, 40 years has been too centralised and too unresponsive to the needs of the country, and too unresponsive to things like the industrial needs of different parts of the country. Tangibly, what we got from that 7-minute speech was two different time frames. We got the idea, firstly, that immediately there'd be some action on rough sleeping, ending rough sleeping, but tomorrow, a wider plan, perhaps more extensive than we had thought, on the cost of living that he said would be paid for. So if this is to be in any way impactful on a wide swathe of the public, it's going to cost billions. Therefore, is that some sort of tax cut? Is that some sort of other cost of living support? If it's going to be paid for, is that some sort of equally controversial tax rise? That's a big decision to do on your first full day as Prime Minister. Whoever is Chancellor, we haven't got a Chancellor yet. When they're walking up there, we might know quite quickly, because they're going to have to get to work and work through the night to make some numbers add up, because that's important. But then I think it's important to note that he said that later this year we will get a 10-year plan for the country and for the economy. And that is where this decentralisation, devolution, spreading power, number 10 North, I think probably infrastructure. I'm intrigued to know, obviously he was a big fan. That was a cause of some tension with Downing Street over the Liverpool to Manchester fast train line. But he's also joined forces immediately with the former mayor of the West Midlands, a Conservative former mayor, Andy Street, on essentially rebooting some form of the cancelled HS2 line from Birmingham to Manchester. Jim O'Neill, the former Treasury Minister under a coalition government, well, I think he's quite an interesting figure in that. So you get an idea of a sort of long-term plan later this year, some immediate respite for the cost of living. We're very interested in how that gets paid, and this plan on rough sleeping. But yeah, it's interesting because it's not perhaps typically at the top of the political priorities that the public have expressed, the idea that the country is too centralised on London. Yeah. But I think it is something, you're from Yorkshire, I'm from Lancashire, is something that has, and so are you, it does have some resonance, I think, with people outside of London. I think the intriguing question is the extent to which Manchester is seen, and his Manchesterism. Some people say that Manchester is a little bit like a mini London. Yes. How much does that represent the rest of the country? And indeed for himself, his Makerfield test versus what goes in the centre of Manchester is quite different from what might go in Makerfield. So these are all intriguing things. We're going to start to get some answers in terms of these trade-offs. Yeah, and it's harder to run a country than it is to run a city.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because going back to the speech, Chris, and the build-up, Manchester this, Manchester that. We were joking about, whether, and we're all from the north, us here, I can say this, we were all, some of these people are going to be wearing bucket hats and that kind of thing. Complete nonsense. But there's a point to it, isn't there, that he needed to, some might argue, speak to the people of deprived areas of South Wales, of Cornwall, of the North East. And that was, some might argue, not the kind of speech that might have been said to be inclusive of everyone, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a really tricky balancing act, this, for him, because clearly his authentic heritage, his political bedrock is grounded there in the northwest of England, in those communities between Liverpool and Manchester. What he's attempting to do now, Clive, is a shimmy, a kind of geographical shimmy, to make an argument that says, look, this is not an exclusively northwest of England or north of England phenomenon. It is a gut sense, he believes, of a detachment that plenty of people feel, sometimes psychologically, sometimes geographically, between what goes on in this postcode and the conventions of this postcode, like lecterns, like suits and ties, like middle-aged men. Oh dear, I suppose the three of us fall into that bucket. Talking a lot about what's going on, that can act as a barrier, visible or otherwise, from people engaging with politics. Now, I noticed actually in that speech, I don't think he referred specifically to number 10 North. Now, granted, he made a big thing of that in that speech he gave a few weeks ago in Manchester. I thought much of the themes of what we heard from him, I was going to say at the lectern, there wasn't a lectern, was there, at the microphone a little while ago, were familiar. We've heard that kind of argument from him and some of the phraseology from him before in recent weeks. Talking about what he's going to say tomorrow, so that's intriguing. What more detail do we get tomorrow? He did, as far as I was touching on, he did explicitly refer to and acknowledge the necessity of spelling out how things are going to be paid for. By gosh, definitely that, because given that list that we've heard, there's clearly a lot of number crunching to be done in the Treasury next door. Once, as far as I mentioned, there's actually a Chancellor to lead that conversation.
Yeah, we're still waiting for an announcement on that, and indeed all the other top posts in his government. But his point would be, Faisal, that if you spread power more evenly across the country, then you can promote growth. And that's where he's going to get the money from. But that takes time.
Yes. And I think in the interim, so there's different time frames. The sort of transformation he was talking about, if it is to work, you know, it's sort of rebooting Britain alongside a model that may have worked in Germany or in Spain to some description. But the point I was making about Greater Manchester is across the whole nation, you really do have to say, if you want to reallocate spending, if you want to spend more on infrastructure somewhere else, if you want to cut the income tax, if you want to extend, stop the freeze on the income tax thresholds, effectively cut taxes, you have to explain how that is funded, either with less spending somewhere else, or with higher taxes, or you might make an argument for higher borrowing, for example, for infrastructure investment. All of that detail is essential now.
But he's going to stay within the fiscal rules.
Yes, and he's not going to. Well, it is decision time now.
Yeah.
We have heard, if you like, a story, a narrative. And I think one thing that was quite interesting about the fact that he did it without a lectern, which is again is just a presentational detail, is that if you've heard his speeches over years, if you've looked at what he wrote down in his book that was co-written with Steve Rotheram, it is very familiar. He sort of believes that stuff very, very strongly. I'm not sure any focus group would have told him decentralisation and devolution is the #1 issue that's going to excite the nation. But he clearly utterly believes it, and utterly believes that that's the way to A, connect with the public, but B, also offer agency to regions and cities so that they can make the decisions to grow. So that they may choose, like they do in Germany and Spain, if they're smaller cities, to borrow more money because they think that they should have underground metro systems in the 3rd and 4th cities in a way we don't have in the United Kingdom, because everything goes through number 11, everything goes through the Treasury. So he has made that argument for years and years and years, genuinely believes it. That's why he can give a speech like that on some quite nerdy details. It's quite nerdy, like the sort of infrastructure of how decisions are made and which level. But, you know, for example, I do wonder, so one of the arguments I've heard, and this is a real test, and one of the fail points, frankly, of the previous administration of Starmer was that they unbelievably, with a majority of 160 odd, couldn't get their welfare plans through their own parliament. And that is what spooked the markets, I have to say. They're like, well, hang on, what can they get through? So one of the arguments I've heard in the background, and again, tomorrow will be the first test of this, is that he can get things with the credibility with the soft left of the party through the party, and frankly, they can't afford to have many rebellions, and he can get things like welfare reform if staged differently. So, for example, you go back to Gordon Brown's plans in 2008-9, where you fund up front the jobs creation for young people. He mentioned that, mental health support. You offer them mental health support. Does that mean you take them off PIP? Is that the heart? But do you offer the support first? And offer billions of support, get them into jobs. That's the best mental health. Do you offer that then at different levels? Do you offer that to city leaders to do that? That is the sort of plan that was being worked up in the background. That is the sort of thing, I think, is why we'll get the long-term plan in a few months' time and not tomorrow.
Yeah, so there might be an adaptability there of policy as far regards some of the left in his party. But is there also a sense that there is potentially an existential threat out there, which is Nigel Farage and reform when it comes to the future of Labour? And that very threat could be what actually ends up keeping some of those backbenchers in line.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, it's intriguing. The Nigel Farage's influence on what we've seen play out this morning shouldn't be underestimated. He and reform and their capacity to frighten the living daylights, frankly, out of the Labour Party in the last couple of years is what accelerated Keir Starmer's movement towards the exit, because the Labour Party feared losing to reform, and there was evidence of that in the elections of just a couple of months ago. Keir Starmer tried to make an argument that he was the best frontman for the Labour Party in taking on reform, and frankly the Labour Party in the end didn't believe him. Picking up on one of Faisal's points there, what will be fascinating to witness in the opening months of Andy Burnham's premiership is the extent to which he can charm and cajole the parliamentary Labour Party into a place where they are willing to do as he would like, basically. Can he take them with him? I think most would accept he is more deft politically than perhaps Keir Starmer was. And the reason this matters is that if he can, he's got a colossal majority that he can use pretty effectively for a good couple of years before the countdown to the next election begins, if this Parliament runs its full course. As far as Andy Burnham and Nigel Farage are concerned, well, this is going to be one of the split-screen tussles of our time in the next couple of years. Who can triumph between Andy Burnham and Nigel Farage? Of course, there are other players in the mix as well, whether it be Kemi Badenoch or the SNP and Plaid in Scotland and Wales, respectively. But Andy Burnham arrives, and this is perhaps the sort of fortune of a good fortune general, if you like. Andy Burnham arrives at just the point that Nigel Farage is hitting pretty severe turbulence. All of those questions that are swirling about money and transparency and accountability. Of course, that by-election that Nigel Farage has chosen to trigger in Clacton in Essex, the seat that he represented prior to resigning his seat. How does that tussle play out in the next couple of months and next couple of years is going to be central to our politics.
Yeah, I mean, Faisal, he talked about staying within the fiscal rules, a clear signal to the markets that we're not going to do anything silly here. This is not going to be a Liz Truss moment. Yes, I'm making promises on all kinds of things, but it's going to be above board. Don't worry. Does that suggest to you that Shabana Mahmood probably is a shoo-in, bearing in mind that she's from the right of the party more than from the left?
Well, I think the context to this is that 3 months ago, then Mayor Burnham did contemplate some changes to the rules, potentially to account, as they have done in Germany, for defence spending having to go up. He rode back from that pretty quickly during the Makerfield by-election, apparently on the advice, this is not the thing to do. Don't shake things up like that. It has consequences sticking to the rules. It means that whatever the quantum of the giveaway that comes tomorrow morning, we expect, it will have to be balanced with something kind of equally controversial that hasn't fully been prepared. Everything that has been out there, been rumoured, seems to be a net spend item, right? It was significant that he chose to say, well, A, as you say, he was going to stick to the fiscal rules, but also that whatever gets announced tomorrow will be paid for. Yeah. But on top of that, as I've said, his longer-term plans, extra infrastructure, maybe changing where infrastructure is spent, there was a suggestion that if Ed Miliband goes to the Foreign Office, that might come accompanied with a return to 0.7% of GDP spent on aid. These are significant amounts. We haven't got a fully costed defence settlement, really. I mean, a bit of it was put in there. Some of that defence, just go back to the Defence Investment Plan. Yeah. The bit that was accepted was the cuts to infrastructure spending on things like transport and net zero. Well, that is precisely the Burnham agenda, to increase that, and yet he is inheriting, trying to find some cuts in that area. So there are very significant trade-offs which we have not heard about. I think in a funny way, coming in here without having had a leadership contest means that he's got a relatively clean slate. But those decisions, those trade-offs, that is what is required. I mean, what's happening now? He's in there getting the hardest of briefings from the cabinet secretary, the most serious of decisions and letters being written on national security. It is a world away from being mayor of a city region, and I think we should take a step back as well. The idea, it's the first time we've had, I think, in our lifetimes, a regional leader take this journey to there. It's a different supply chain of a leader. But yes, we wait to see how he squares the tough trade-offs that won't change as a result of the change in number 10 and potentially number 11 as well.
Yeah, Chris, we should be getting some indication as to some of the top jobs today.
We should. I'm going to dash in a second to try and find out just some of that information, but we should get within the next couple of hours the key jobs in the cabinet, not least the Chancellor, the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary. More cabinet posts to follow throughout the afternoon and into the evening, and then a whole slew of more junior ministers to follow tomorrow. But I'm going to dash, Clive, because hopefully I can find out
You've got to go.
just the answer to that question.
All right, Chris Mason, political editor, leaving us for a wee while there. You're watching watching a BBC News special on this transformative day for British politics with the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, now in there, number 10, getting a briefing from the Cabinet Secretary, basically having to write a letter straight away concerning what his view would be if this country came under attack and what would be the movements for our nuclear submarine fleet. And then, of course, he's going to start, we understand, announcing the members of his cabinet who will be taking forward his agenda. He hopes for the next 10 years. He's already suggested that one of his first actions will be to try to institute measures to deal with the rough sleeping problem across the United Kingdom. We know that he's tried to institute certain policies concerning that up in Manchester and has been, to a degree, successful in other areas, not so successful. So the jury is out on that. But he's trying to have a national look at the rough sleeping problem here. And then there will be more immediate policy measures announced in the coming days. And then sometime later in the year, a 10-year plan as to where he's taking this country. With me is our economics editor, Faisal Islam, to continue the conversation. We've been discussing the possibility that he's not going to break the fiscal rules. He's going to stay within the economic guidelines that have been laid down in the manifesto and from Rachel Reeves, the previous Chancellor. But he's still got to find the money from somewhere. And the suggestion from some newspapers this morning is that we're going to see some tax rises.
Yeah. I mean, I do wonder about that thing around the manifesto. Yeah. Because if you like, there's a Venn diagram here of the constraints of the manifesto which he didn't stand on and what he really wants to get done. And the 10-year plan, you know, he's been consistent in terms of what he thinks the fundamental medium-term change in the country should be, which would be extra infrastructure spending, things like that. You know, so one of the things that will be revealed in the next 2 or 3 months is the extent to which he's bursting against the limits of the manifesto. He wants to do a lot more than that. Certainly, off my patch in the constitutional area, he wants to do a whole load of stuff around PR, around changing the House of Lords, which he sees as part of the devolution, decentralisation agenda. That's all in his book. He wants to do that. That is not mentioned in the manifesto. So there's a balancing act to judge that is important to the markets too, as to whether the changes that he's looking for, whether they really do require him to get his own mandate. And therefore whether an election may come, the precise timing of any election. Because, yes, will he feel constrained by this mandate? If we go back to the mini-budget episode, you know, the thing that really did for Liz Truss, yes, it was not having a budget that added up, but it was also not being able to command the Conservatives on, for example, the sorts of cuts to public spending that might have made her budget add up. So, and so she didn't have the mandate to do what she wanted to do. So, quite quickly the markets are asking not just do your numbers add up, but can you pass this through Parliament? And can you pass what you really want to do through Parliament? So I think that is one thing to watch very carefully, which is the extent to which the policies that we know that he wants to pursue, because he has long suggested them, he puts on hold to keep within the 2024 manifesto, or he clearly starts suggesting them. And then there's a question mark about when we get an election. Now, clearly, he's not going to talk about that now. That is what the markets, he said he's going to stick to the rules. He said he's going to make the whatever tax giveaway or whatever cost of living giveaway is going to be paid for tomorrow. We then get this 10-year plan, which, as you say, was meant to promote growth, but you've got to persuade the Office of Budget Responsibility that it's going to promote growth. But then there's a whole load of other things that he says he wants to do that were not in the 2024 manifesto that raise a question about his strategy.
Yeah, I mean, not a whole lot in that speech concerning foreign policy. But one area that certainly Sir Keir Starmer touched on in his goodbye speech, as it were, was Ukraine. And Andy Burnham had his own views on that. Let's hear what he said.
So much.
I'll be making very clear later today to President Zelensky that there is no change. I will be with him 100%, as Keir Starmer has been, and Keir has done really quite an incredible job in not just backing Ukraine, but being there in a personal way. And I will be absolutely there for him in the same way. I've worked with Ukrainian mayors over the last few years. I've built a network of support for Ukrainian mayors. I take all of that experience into my new role, and President Zelensky will be left in no doubt whatsoever that Britain's support is steadfast, it is resolute, it will be there for him, and I will be there for him personally too.
Andy Burnham speaking before he became Prime Minister. There with me is our international editor, Jeremy Bowen. Interesting that Sir Keir Starmer made a point of talking about Ukraine in his leaving speech, as it were, and we heard Andy Burnham there too. I mean, that one of a whole slew of thorny international issues that this new Prime Minister is going to have to get his head around.
Absolutely, he's probably being briefed on stuff at the moment. Ukraine was, of course, the centrepiece for Keir Starmer, and one of the complaints made about the former Prime Minister was that he spent too much time abroad and that Mr. Burnham needs to concentrate on domestic issues. The point is, Prime Ministers always discover that there's a big world out there and it can come to bite you quite quickly, and there'll be a lot of immediate demands. And it's not just Ukraine, it's defence spending, it's European security, wider European security, and of course the Middle East, where the US-Iran war is at the moment seemingly escalating quite steadily and rapidly.
I mean, Donald Trump has said that he hasn't really heard much about this man called Andy Burnham.
He said he runs
a city somewhere,
yeah.
And he's very liberal, very liberal. How do you see that relationship panning out between the two men?
Well, it's, Mr. Burnham has personal charm. Maybe he will find some affinity with Donald Trump on that sense. But, when Donald Trump says someone sounds liberal, it's not meant as a compliment. I mean, that is absolutely clear. And there are issues that will come up that might aggravate the Americans. He's talked, for example, about banning trade with Jewish settlements, which are illegal under international law. Now, that's something that the Americans have been against. Now, will that alienate Donald Trump? It might do. It might be the makings of a nasty conversation when eventually he goes for his chat with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. And of course, there will be immediate pressure to spend more money on defence. The US ambassador in London has done a piece in the newspapers today where he's calling for that, spending more money, more rapidly, because that is a way of signaling to the Americans that their hearts and minds are in the right place. However, of course, America's own commitment to the relationship with Britain and with the wider European relationship in general is clearly under Donald Trump and in some big question.
I was going to say that relationship with NATO as well, and trying to navigate Britain's relationship there with Donald Trump. How's he going to balance those two things?
It's going to be a big challenge, to be quite honest, because a lot of people are now in Europe basically assume that if there's a crisis, Europe is going to have to try and sort things out for themselves. I'm talking about a military crisis with Russia. And that actually that the Americans can no longer be relied upon in the way that not all that long ago they might have been.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things in terms of the relationship with Donald Trump. I mean, he has mentioned, or it's reached him, that Mr. Burnham might have a different approach to oil and gas in the North Sea. Now, he's hemmed in at the minute in terms of the manifesto commitment to no new development, but there are some flexibilities you can have on existing developments. We're waiting for a decision on gas and oil fields called Jackdaw and Rosebank. The mood music we get is that this new administration, is keener to get ahead on this, but another paradox and a trade-off to work out exactly where he lands, because he's also said that the net zero agenda, this green industrialisation, is the future of the economy. So the balancing act we are waiting for there. The other issue that is high up on the agenda was, this week we were due to have a summit with the European Union on this post-Brexit reset, with a move back closer to the single market in a couple of areas designed to take away the red tape in food and farm exports. That was done. That was cooked. That was ready to go. Change of Prime Minister, it's been delayed. Now the question is, does Andy Burnham sounds quite warm to the idea of picking that deal up and running it? There are some controversies, for example, over students and student fees and how they're paid for. Does he go even further? I mean, just a year ago, he was talking at a Labour Party conference on the fringes about, in his lifetime, we might rejoin the European Union. But now, since he started representing a Leave seat in Makerfield, he sort of shied away and said, well, that's not really for now. So there's an interesting question, and although it may not be the most sort of pertinent question in Westminster right now, on his left flank with those Green supporters that Labour had been losing votes to, that is an issue that he'll want to shore up potentially. We don't know. There will be a summit he'll have to attend, and the trade-offs will be owned by the new Prime Minister. Yeah, well, one wonders who the first foreign leader will be to give him that phone call, which is the usual thing when a new Prime Minister takes over. There's a good detail here, which is he becomes... There is now 2 people around the G7 table who are supporters of Everton Football Club. Because Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, is also a supporter. So that is a moment of history for the Toffees, that they'll have 2 people around the G7.
There's another thing that needs to be said about top tables. There is one top table that Britain is still very much has an automatic seat on, which is the Security Council of the UN. And probably Britain could do more with that. In general, the UK has been more absent than present in a lot of international deliberations since the Brexit referendum 10 years ago, because we have been so introspective. And I think that is one thing that has changed.
Yeah, all right, Jeremy, international editor Jeremy Bowen there. Let's hear a little bit more of what Andy Burnham was saying here in number 10, outside number 10, about 40 minutes ago.
I will bring forward a new plan for Britain, a 10-year plan, laying out a path from where we are now to where I believe we all want Britain to be, wherever we're coming from, whatever party we support. But I can do something to give people some breathing space now, some help with the cost of living. And I will set out some of those measures starting tomorrow, including how we pay for them. We will help more young people into work by changing the education system and giving them more support, more mental health support. And we will build more council homes. That is the fair and sustainable way to bring the welfare bill down, to meet our fiscal rules and to honour our commitments on defence to our international partners. We will help people to live well, building a more preventative state, investing in people's success rather than paying for failure. And that work starts now. I will soon go through that door behind me and issue my first instruction to end rough sleeping in our country. It's about putting the right values and the right standards.
Andy Burnham speaking just a few minutes ago now. He's inside number 10, getting the briefing of his life, one suspects, as he comes up to speed. I mean, Laura Koonsberg is with us from the Laura Koonsberg Show on Sunday. It has to be said, doesn't it? The speed with which all this has happened. I mean, less than a month ago, barely a month ago, he was the mayor of Greater Manchester.
That's right. And less than 3 years ago, Keir Starmer, which is still the leader of the opposition. Then, of course, he won a huge election victory. Only 2 years since Labour won that landslide majority. Think about the big picture. When people look at that in the decades to come, seeing that written down in black and white in the history books, that is an extraordinary thing to have happened in a country that used to be, for decades, seen as politically
politically stable. And it was notable, I think, that Andy Burnham, almost at the top of his speech, wanted to draw people's attention to that, really addressing the public very directly. I'm paraphrasing, but basically saying, I know politics has been wild and crazy, and I promise you I'm going to do my best to stop doing that. We have to be better, was one of his words about his generation of politicians. In a way, it's happened very fast, but also, let's remember, he first ran to be the Labour leader in 2010, and he ran again in 2015,
So
and
he's
I think
part
those
of
broad
that, though,
smiles
isn't it?
that he was on his face.
But this is the yes, I mean, he's sort of, you know, nodding to that fact that he's been part of that process of change, of trying to get a new leader in, kick another one out. I mean, how does he make it clear that I'm not the old politician, I'm not from that old caste, I am something new? How does he get that across?
That he's not the smiling assassin, if you like. I mean, it's a tricky thing. Andy Burnham has always tried to create his own sort of Labour persona, if you like. He was someone who said he was loyal to Tony Blair. He was someone then who said he was loyal to Gordon Brown. He's someone who then also said he was loyal to Jeremy Corbyn. We'll see if the rest of the party's loyal to him now.
We will indeed. Laura Koonsberg, many thanks for that. You've been watching a BBC News special here on the day that Andy Burnham takes over as Prime Minister.
Good morning from Downing Street. It's Monday, July the 20th.
It's on the day that Labour's Andy Burnham becomes the UK's 7th Prime Minister in 10 years.
Thank you very much, and good morning. I'm about to visit His Majesty the King to offer my resignation. I go with good grace, I go with a smile, and I go proud of everything that we have achieved.
And now he makes his way to head to Buckingham Palace to formally hand in his resignation as Prime Minister to the King.
These are our images of the last man, the monarch, who will call Keir Starmer Prime Minister. And there we see the convoy and the police escorts as Andy Burnham makes his way into Buckingham Palace, where the King will ask him to form a government.
Welcome to Buckingham Palace. Please, let's go and see the King.
The car door about to open with the new Prime Minister in that Range Rover, and he'll be wandering up to the microphone shortly and no doubt greeted by cheers. Here he comes.
I am acutely conscious that I am the 6th person in the last 10 years to walk up this street, the 7th Prime Minister since 2016, making this a moment for reflection and new resolution. Let's build a new national sense of unity, of common purpose and positivity. Let us make this the moment when Britain starts to believe again, the moment we bring back hope. Thank you very much, everybody.